The invitation sat on my desk, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, the same stationery my father had used to write my disownment letter 15 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Please join us for dinner at the Anderson family estate at 8. Your presence is urgently requested. My assistant Thomas watched as I turned the invitation over in my hands. Are you going to go? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Manhattan skyline from my corner office. What do you think, Thomas? After 15 years of silence, they suddenly want a family dinner. My name is Sarah Anderson, though I haven't used that last name since I was 22. Back then, I was just the rebellious older daughter who dared to question my father's business practices. Now I'm Sarah Wu, CEO of Avalon Industries, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the world. And I just signed the papers to buy out Anderson Technologies, my family's failing company. The merger documents are ready, Thomas said, placing a thick folder on my desk. Everything's set for next week's board meeting. I nodded, still staring at the invitation. Have you seen the latest numbers from Anderson Tech? Thomas pulled up a tablet, scrolling through reports. Stock's down 60% from last year. Your sister's latest product launch was a disaster. Rumors that they won't make payroll next month. Rachel, my perfect younger sister, who'd always done everything right in our father's eyes. The one he'd chosen to run the company, claiming she had the right temperament for leadership. The same sister who hadn't spoken a word in my defense when he'd thrown me out. Book me a flight to Boston, I said finally. Let's see what they want. The Anderson estate hadn't changed in 15 years. Same manicured lawns, same imposing stone facade, same sense of old money and older expectations. As my car pulled up the circular driveway, I saw other vehicles already parked, Rachel's Range Rover, my father's Bentley. Thomas had insisted on having a car wait for me. Just in case, he'd said. Smart man. The butler, not the same one from my childhood, opened the door before I could knock. Miss Anderson, he greeted me formally. Miss Wu, I corrected him. His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. Of course, my apologies, Miss Wu. The family is waiting in the study. The study where all important Anderson family decisions were made, where my father had told me I was no longer welcome in his house or his company. I straightened my Prada jacket and followed the butler down the familiar hallway. Family photos lined the walls. Rachel's graduation, her wedding, her taking over as CEO. My face was conspicuously absent, all traces of my existence carefully removed. The study door was open. Inside, my father sat behind his massive desk, looking older than I remembered, but still radiating authority. Rachel perched on the leather sofa, her designer outfit not quite hiding her nervous fidgeting. And in a corner, my mother sat silently, just as she had the day I left. Sarah, my father said, standing. Thank you for coming. I remained in the doorway, not quite entering their space. Well, when the great William Anderson requests your presence, how can you refuse? Rachel flinched at my tone. Father's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. Please sit. We have much to discuss. I chose an armchair near the door, crossing my legs and waiting. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, my father spoke. We're aware of your success in recent years. I raised an eyebrow. My success? You mean building a billion-dollar company from scratch while you were grooming Rachel to run Anderson Tech into the ground? Sarah, please, my mother spoke for the first time. We're trying to have a civil conversation. Civil? I laughed. Like the civil way you all sat there while father threw me out, or the civil way you've pretended I don't exist for 15 years. Rachel stood up suddenly. We made mistakes, okay? Is that what you want to hear? We were wrong. I studied my sister, really looked at her for the first time. The perfect blonde hair was styled as immaculately as ever, but there were shadows under her eyes, tension in her shoulders. Running a failing company didn't look good on her. Why am I here? I asked, turning back to my father. He sighed heavily, looking every bit his 65 years. Anderson Technologies is in trouble. We need your help. And there it was, not an apology, not an acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, just another business transaction. Your help? I kept my voice neutral. What kind of help? We've seen what you've done with Avalon Industries, he said. The innovation, the growth. We need that kind of thinking at Anderson Tech. I thought about the merger documents waiting in my briefcase, about the months of careful planning that had led to this moment. And what exactly are you offering? A partnership, Rachel jumped in. Co-CEO position, equal say in the company's direction. I almost laughed. They had no idea how close they were to having no say at all. Let me get this straight, I said, standing. For 15 years, I was the family disappointment, the one who didn't understand business, the one who wasn't worthy of the Anderson name. But now that you're failing, suddenly I'm good enough. That's not fair, Rachel protested. Things are different now. Different? I turned to her. Different how? Because you failed at the job you were handed on a silver platter. Because you couldn't handle the responsibility you were so sure you deserved. Enough, my father's voice cracked like a whip. We're offering you a chance to come home, Sarah, to be part of the family again. I reached for my briefcase, pulling out the merger documents. That's a generous offer, Dad, but I have a counter-proposal. I placed the papers on his desk, watching as he picked them up. His face went pale as he read. What is this? The future of Anderson Technologies, I said calmly. Avalon Industries has been buying shares through various subsidiaries for months. As of next week's board meeting, we'll own controlling interest in your company. Rachel grabbed the papers from our father's hands, her eyes scanning frantically. This is impossible. You can't? Can't what? I asked. Can't outmaneuver the mighty Andersons, can't build something bigger and better than you, can't take everything you thought was yours. My father stood up, his face red with anger. You planned this, all of it. No, Dad, you planned this. The moment you decided Rachel was more worthy of your trust, your love, your legacy, you set this in motion. I just learned from your example. We'll fight this, he threatened. We have lawyers. Yes, you do, I agreed. The same lawyers who helped me structure this deal. Turns out loyalty can be bought. Another lesson I learned from you. The silence in the study was deafening. My mother had gone completely still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Rachel looked like she might be sick, and my father, he just kept staring at the merger documents like they might somehow change if he glared at them long enough. The board meeting is next Tuesday, I said, standing up. I suggest you take the weekend to come to terms with this. Please. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. Sarah, we're your family. I turned to her, feeling the old pain surface. Family? Where was this family when Dad threw me out? When Rachel took everything that should have been shared between us? When I was struggling to build something of my own? You never needed our help, Rachel said quietly. Look at what you've built. I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You think Avalon Industries happened by magic? I worked 18-hour days for years. I lived in a tiny apartment, ate ramen noodles, and pitched to every investor who would listen. And you know what kept me going? Knowing that someday I'd be strong enough to make you all see what you threw away. My father finally found his voice. So this is revenge. No, Dad, this is business. Isn't that what you always taught us? Never let emotions cloud your judgment. I picked up my briefcase. Anderson Technologies is failing. Avalon Industries can save it. The fact that I get to do it, that's just what did you use to call it? A fortunate business opportunity. As I turned to leave, Rachel caught my arm. Wait, what's going to happen to us? To our jobs? I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The golden child who'd had everything handed to her, who'd never had to fight for anything in her life. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. That depends, I said. Are you willing to earn your position for once? Before anyone could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, Thomas, right on schedule. I have to take this, I said, stepping into the hallway. Thomas, how did the board calls go? Better than expected, he reported. Most of them are already on board with the merger. They've seen the numbers. They know Anderson Tech can't survive without outside intervention. Good. And the press release? Ready to go after Tuesday's meeting. The business papers are already speculating about a possible buyout. Your father's mismanagement and Rachel's failed product launches have made it an easy sale. I ended the call and turned to find my mother standing in the doorway. You thought of everything, haven't you? She asked softly. I had to, I replied. You all taught me that nothing less than perfection was acceptable. She flinched. We were wrong, Sarah. About so many things. Yes, you were. Can we? Is there any way to fix this? I studied her face, the same face that had watched silently as my father destroyed my life 15 years ago. Fix what, Mom? The company, the family. Some things can't be fixed, I said. They can only be rebuilt. And rebuilding requires change. Back in the study, my father had moved to the window, staring out at the gardens where he'd once taught Rachel and me about the importance of the Anderson legacy. "What are your terms?" he asked without turning around. "For the company? They're in the merger documents. For the family?" I paused. "That's more complicated." Rachel looked up from where she'd been reading the merger papers. "You're not firing everyone, are you? There are people who depend on those jobs." "Unlike you, I actually care about the employees," I said. "Anyone who's qualified and willing to adapt will have a place in the new organization. But there will be changes. Big ones." "And us?" she asked quietly. "That depends on you. Are you willing to start at the bottom? Learn the business properly? Prove you deserve your position?" She nodded slowly. I think I need to." "Good, because that's your only option if you want to stay with the company." "And me?" My father turned from the window. "You'll be offered a position on the board. Non-executive, no direct management role. Your years of experience could be valuable, but you won't be running things anymore." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time in my life, I saw William Anderson accept defeat. "The board meeting is at 10 a.m. on Tuesday," I said, gathering my things. "I suggest you all be prepared." As I reached the door, my mother called out, Will you stay for dinner?" I turned back, looking at my family, really looking at them. My father, proud but defeated. Rachel, scared but finally understanding. My mother, hopeful but uncertain. "No," I said softly, "not tonight. We have too much history for casual family dinners. But maybe someday." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. Thomas kept me updated on the board members' responses, most enthusiastically supporting the merger, seeing it as their best chance to salvage their investments. On Monday evening, as I sat in my hotel room reviewing the final presentations, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Can we meet? Just us?" I considered ignoring it, but something made me respond. "Lobby bar. 30 minutes." She was already there when I arrived, nursing what looked like a very expensive glass of wine. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "What do you want, Rachel?" She took a deep breath. "I wanted to say I'm sorry, not just for now, but for then. For not standing up for you when Dad threw you out. For taking everything without questioning it. For being exactly who they wanted me to be instead of who I should have been." I signaled the bartender for a drink. "And you're just realizing this now?" "No," she admitted. "I've known for years that I was in over my head, that I wasn't cut out for this. But I was too proud, too scared to admit it." "So what changed?" "You did. Seeing what you've built, how strong you've become, it made me realize what real leadership looks like." I studied my sister, looking for any sign of manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. "You know things can't go back to how they were," I said finally. "I know. I don't want them to. I want to learn, really learn from the ground up." "Will you teach me?" The next morning, I stood before the Anderson Technologies Board of Directors, my father and sister seated among them. As I presented Avalon Industries' vision for the merged companies, I couldn't help but appreciate the symmetry of the moment minus 15 years ago in this same room. My father had told me I wasn't worthy of the family business. Now I was showing him exactly what he'd thrown away. The vote was unanimous. By noon, Anderson Technologies was officially part of Avalon Industries. As the board members filed out, my father approached me. "You've won," he said simply. "This isn't about winning, Dad. It's about fixing what's broken in the company and maybe eventually in the family." He nodded slowly. "I underestimated you. I was wrong." "Yes, you were. The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" He straightened his shoulders, and for a moment, I saw the man who had once taught me about business before pride and prejudice had poisoned everything. "I'm going to watch my daughter run the company I should have trusted her with 15 years ago," he said. "If she'll let me." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a start. 6 months later, I sat in what had once been my father's office, now my secondary workspace when I was in Boston. Rachel was presenting her analysis of a potential new product line, work she'd done from the ground up, starting as a junior analyst. "The market research suggests a strong demand," she concluded, "but we need to address these production challenges." I watched my sister confidently handle questions from the team. showing a grasp of details she'd never bothered with before. She was learning, growing, becoming the businesswoman she could have been years ago if she hadn't been handed everything too easily. After the meeting, she lingered behind. That went well, right? It did, I agreed. You've come a long way in 6 months. Thanks to you, she said quietly, for giving me a chance I probably didn't deserve. Everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves, Rachel. Even spoiled little sisters who take 15 years to grow up. She laughed, a real laugh, not the artificial one she perfected for society parties. Mom asked me to remind you about Sunday dinner. I've been to exactly 2 family dinners in the past 6 months. They were still awkward, still heavy with unspoken words and lingering hurt. But they were also something else. A beginning. Maybe, I said. I have a lot of work to do. You always have a lot of work to do, Rachel pointed out. But maybe that's not all there is to life. Maybe sometimes family dinner is just family dinner. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The entitled princess was gone, replaced by someone more real, more substantial. Maybe, I agreed. Later that evening, as I worked late in the office, I found myself looking at an old photo I kept in my desk. Me and Rachel as children, before expectations and favoritism had torn us apart. We were smiling, arms around each other, unaware of the years of pain and separation ahead. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Board reports show key 3 profits up 40% since merger. Anderson Tech Division exceeding all projections. I smiled, thinking about how far we'd all come. My father was learning to be a board member instead of a dictator. Rachel was earning her place instead of expecting it. Even my mother was finding her voice, slowly but surely. And me? I was learning that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's showing people exactly what they missed out on, and then maybe giving them a chance to make it right. I picked up my phone and texted Rachel. Tell Mom
Life in the urban sprawl as a police officer doesn't just toughen you, it encases you in a shell of skepticism, so thick it might as well be Kevlar. That was me, Emma, a 37-year-old former lieutenant turned private detective. I lugged around a suitcase of mistrust heavier than the cases I cracked, my daily grind orbiting around unfaithful partners and the art of deception. Not exactly the setting for a romantic tale, right? Then Bobby strolled into my life, a beacon of modern art, refreshing my world like a vibrant brushstroke on a fading mural. We crossed paths at an art exhibition in Philadelphia, swarming with enthusiasts tossing around terms like postmodern and avant-garde with effortless poise. Out of my depth, I felt more misplaced than ever, like a fish pedaling a bicycle rather than swimming in its natural habitat. Intriguing piece, isn't it? Bobby initiated, his gaze fixed on what appeared to be a strategically placed heap of junk. My eyes flicked between him and this masterpiece. If by intriguing you mean I've seen tidier trash heaps, then absolutely, it's fascinating, I quipped. His laugh, deep and resonant, turned heads as he introduced himself. Fast forward 7 months, and I'm utterly smitten, caught up in a whirlwind romance that seemed too surreal. Bobby, a dapper man right out of a style magazine and a gentleman from a past era, swept me off my feet with poetry readings, exquisite art showings, and the kind of attention that made me feel like the only woman alive. Under a starlit sky in Central Park, Bobby proposed, and without a moment's hesitation, I said yes, my heart pounding with sheer joy. The engagement period was a haze of bliss. I often caught myself daydreaming of a future brimming with love, laughter, and children. But the adage about things too good to be true? It began to echo louder when I met Bobby's mother, Marilyn, the epitome of frostiness, who scrutinized me as if I were spoiling the family pedigree. A detective? Isn't that a tad unladylike? She probed during our first unsettling dinner. Depends on the century your ladylike is anchored in, I retorted without missing a beat, earning a tense smile from Bobby. Marilyn's visits grew more frequent, each one an audit of our burgeoning life together. It was a chilly Tuesday evening, just 3 weeks into our marriage, when she appeared unannounced, her disdain palpable. "Emma, darling," she began, her tone thick with condescension. "I see you're still clinging to your quaint job. I had hoped marriage would refine you into a proper lady." I was slicing vegetables for dinner, the knife suddenly appealing for more than just culinary reasons. Maryland, where I come from, we call this earning a living. Maybe you should try it sometime, instead of leeching off others, I replied, my voice steady, as her lips pursed tightly. Marilyn maintained her poised demeanor as she suggested. Bobby was raised with certain expectations, Emma. There's still time for you to switch to a career that's more suitable, something a bit more refined. Respectable? Like being a full-time meddler? I replied, the sharpness in my voice unmistakable. Thanks, but I'd rather stick to tracking down unfaithful spouses and deceivers. Speaking of which, how is your bridge club treating you? Just then, Bobby entered, his arrival impeccably timed. What's going on? He queried, his eyes shifting between his mother and me. Your wife was clarifying her professional choices for me. I must confess, I hadn't appreciated the allure of working so closely with lawbreakers, Marilyn remarked, her tone overly sweet. Bobby sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose. Mom, Emma's career is crucial to her. It's part of her identity. Turning towards me with a look of appeal, he said, Emma, let's not do this now, please. I was itching to argue, to defend my boundaries that his mother was overstepping, but I restrained myself. She was, after all, his mother. Fine, I said tersely, turning back to aggressively chop the vegetables. The atmosphere became noticeably colder after Marilyn's visits. Bobby would retreat into a silent shell that I found impenetrable. It was painfully clear which side he was on, and it wasn't mine. On one particularly tense evening, after Marilyn had criticized everything from my culinary skills to my housekeeping, I confronted Bobby. Why don't you ever stand up for me? Your mother treats me like I'm invisible, and you just let her. Is this what our marriage is supposed to be? Bobby looked weary as he replied, Emma, she's old-fashioned. What do you want me to do? Cut her off? No, I just want you to support me. To tell her she can't bulldoze over us. Is that asking too much? He sighed, his frustration visible as he raked his fingers through his hair. I'll talk to her, okay? Just give it some time. She'll adjust. But she didn't. Neither did he. The gap between us widened, stoked by Marilyn's coldness and Bobby's passivity, forming a rift that seemed too vast to close. This was no longer just a rocky beginning. It was a stark preview of a potentially bleak future if things didn't change. Living with Bobby started feeling like being part of a melodrama where the cracks in the perfect exterior gradually began to show. He worked at a prestigious art gallery, which might sound impressive until you realize how erratic his earnings were. Meanwhile, I was doing quite well, securing a comfortable lifestyle for us in a stylish apartment in a desirable neighborhood. One evening, as we discussed the future over dinner, I brought up the idea of eventually buying a house and thinking about the space we'd want if we planned to start a family. Bobby paused his fork midair and looked at me quizzically. Emma, where are you getting these ideas? We don't need a house, and me finding a new job isn't on the agenda. I set my fork down, trying to maintain a calm tone. It's not about need, Bobby. It's about planning for our future. And having a stable income would certainly help. He chuckled, a sound that once made me smile but now seemed to scratch at my patience. You and your fixation on money. You always focus on the financial bottom line, don't you? Money isn't everything, Emma. His laughter pushed my frustration to the edge. It's easy for you to say when you're not the one stressed about paying the bills each month. I'm not fixated on money. Bobby had shrugged dismissively, returning to his meal as if we were merely discussing the weather. I'm happy with our life as it is. You're the one who's never satisfied. I stood up, losing my appetite. Maybe I wouldn't be so focused on money if you contributed more than just critiques about how I manage ours. He didn't even glance up. I contribute in other ways, Emma. Not everything is about money. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't just about buying a house, planning for kids, or even the finances. It was about respect, partnership, and support, none of which Bobby seemed to value as long as his life remained comfortable. His quick dismissal of my concerns as an obsession with money was a way to dodge the real issues between us. On a seemingly ordinary Sunday, our living room unexpectedly turned into a stage for high drama when Marilyn, my not-so-favorite mother-in-law, dropped in. The air grew tense as she remained glued to her phone, her voice wavering between panic and confusion. And you're telling me my social security number has been suspended? How much do I need to pay to fix this? Marilyn's voice cracked, her hands trembling as she rummaged through her purse for her checkbook and documents. In the kitchen with a coffee in hand, I overheard her mention Social Security and payments. Years of police work had sharpened my instincts, and every alarm bell in my head went off. This was a scam. I hurried into the living room. My approach was quiet but quick. Marilyn, hang up the phone. It's a scam, I interjected firmly but calmly, hoping to convey urgency without causing panic. She turned, shocked and offended. I beg your pardon? I'm handling this, Emma. There's no need for your intrusion. But before she could protest further, I stepped forward, grabbed the phone, and ended the call with a decisive click. Silence enveloped the room, thick with tension. Marilyn recoiled as if I had struck her, her face twisting into an expression of fury and disbelief.
How dare you?
That was incredibly rude and uncalled for. Who do you think you are, treating me like some naive child? Bobby, drawn by the commotion, appeared at the threshold, his face a mix of concern and frustration. Emma, what's going on? Why are you upsetting my mothers? I turned to him, my frustration mounting. That call was from scammers, Bobby. They were trying to con Marilyn out of her money by claiming her social security number was suspended. This is a common tactic. I've seen it 100 times. Bobby rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I recognized as him feeling cornered. Okay, but couldn't you have been a bit more diplomatic about it? Marilyn, gathering her belongings with shaking hands, shot me a look sharp enough to curdle milk. I don't need to be saved, especially not by someone who treats me with such disrespect. I'm leaving. We'll see what the bank says about this so-called scam. She stormed out, leaving a chilly silence behind. Bobby sighed, his gaze shifting between the door and me. Emma, I know you meant well, but you have to handle things more gently, especially with my mother. I felt a twinge of guilt, but stood my ground. I know it seemed harsh. There wasn't time for polite exchanges. Scammers thrive on urgency, and any hesitation could have cost Marilyn dearly. The next day, still feeling a mix of curiosity and guilt, I decided to call her. After 3 rings, she picked up, her voice cold and measured. What do you want, Emma? I cleared my throat. I just wanted to check on you after yesterday. Did you speak with the bank about that call? There was a pause on the line before she reluctantly admitted, yes, I did. They confirmed it was a scam. Her tone hardened, but that doesn't excuse how you handled things. You were rude and aggressive. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling the onset of a headache. I'm sorry if I seemed harsh. I was just trying to protect you. These scammers are professional deceivers, and they're very convincing. Her reply was curt, laced with a hint of begrudging gratitude. Well, I suppose I should thank you for stopping a mistake. But don't think this changes my view of your methods or your demeanor. Goodbye, Emma. The tension between Bobby and me had deepened, turning our home from a warm sanctuary into a chilly battlefield. Clinging to hope, I saw his upcoming birthday as an opportunity to melt the ice, to rekindle the fading spark of our relationship. I meticulously planned a weekend getaway just for the two of us, dreaming of restoring what we once had. However, as fate, or rather Marilyn would have it, she bulldozed through my plans with her own. She scheduled a grand dinner at her mansion on a weekday, fully aware my work schedule was overflowing. I pleaded with her over the phone. Can't we just push it to Saturday? I'm swamped at work. Her voice was a blend of syrup and frost.
No, dear.
This is when it's happening. Bobby shouldn't have to adjust his birthday to fit around your job. Frustration gnawing at me, I found myself confiding in my boss, the only person who seemed to understand. He had seen enough deceit and betrayal to fill in more novel, yet he recognized the importance of this gesture. Go, he urged, giving me a knowing look. Do what you need to do. Arriving at Marilyn's, the party was already in full swing, an ostentatious display of pretense. Marilyn spotted me like a predator zeroes in on prey, her smile tightening as she quickly whispered something to Bobby. There he was, my husband, ensconced by the fireplace, his arm casually draped around a woman who was more than just a colleague. My heart sank, but I steeled myself and approached them. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" I asked, striving to inject calm into my voice that I didn't feel. Bobby flinched as if shocked, his eyes widening. Emma, this is Lori from the gallery," he mumbled, then turned to her. "And this is Emma, a relative." The room might as well have spun. "A relative? Seriously, Bobby? Your wife, remember?" I couldn't keep the incredulity and anger from my voice, the words echoing louder than intended. A hush fell over the room, all eyes on us. Bobby's expression morphed, a mix of embarrassment and irritation flashing across his face. "You know, a real wife would have made her husband's birthday a priority," he snapped back, turning away as if dismissing me from his presence. Before I could recover, Marilyn slithered over, her voice dripping with disdain. "You see, Emma, you just don't fit in here. Bobby needs someone supportive, like Lori, not whatever this is." Her words were like a slap, each one designed to cut deep. Marilyn's voice was venomous as she gestured dismissively towards the door. "I think it's best if you leave. You're not wanted here." Her words hung in the air, sharp and biting. "You know what, Marilyn? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in a family that thrives on lies and deception." With dignity I scarcely felt, I walked out, the chill of the night enveloping me like an unwelcome embrace. After the disaster at Bobby's birthday and the stark revelations that followed, I knew I needed undeniable proof if I was going to end this marriage on my terms. The thought of following Bobby myself was overwhelming. I could handle unearthing secrets about strangers, but not about the man I once planned to grow old with. So, I reached out to Alan, a colleague known for his knack for uncovering discreet affairs. "Hey, Alan, I need a favor," I managed to say, steadying my voice over the phone. "Anything for you." "What's up?" he responded immediately, his loyalty a small comfort amidst my storm of betrayal. "It's Bobby. I'm sure he's seeing someone." "I need evidence," I admitted, the words bringing a mix of relief and dread. "Say no more. I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have everything you need soon," Alan assured me, his confidence easing some of my anxiety. True to his word, Alan delivered. Photos, audio clips, the works. It was damning. Lori was indeed more than just a colleague. She was here illegally, seeking a quick marriage to fix her status, and involved in fraud. Part of me wanted to confront Bobby, to throw the evidence in his face and watch him squirm. But then I remembered his condescension, his dismissiveness, and that perpetual smug expression. No, he didn't deserve my concern or my help. Filing for divorce felt like tearing off a Band-Aid from a long-festering wound. I demanded financial compensation for his betrayal. It was the least he could do after everything. The fallout was explosive. Marilyn, ever the dragon lady, sided with him, painting me as the villain. But I stood my ground, fueled by the evidence and the injustice of their accusations. The ink on the divorce papers wasn't just dry. It was a testament to a new chapter one was desperate to start. Opening my detective agency wasn't just a dream come true. It was a rebirth, a new beginning from the ashes of my past life with Bobby. The agency quickly earned a reputation for discretion and effectiveness, a reflection of the lessons I'd learned from my saga. One day, as sunlight streamed into my new office, illuminating the framed license on the wall, Alice, my right-hand woman and friend, peeked in. "Boss lady, you've got a minute? We've got a potentially big case. A woman suspects her husband of having an affair and wants the full works. Surveillance, photos, the lot." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Sounds like our bread and butter. Do we have the details?" Alice nodded, placing the file on my desk. "Yeah, but there's a catch. She's got a tight budget." I thought for a moment. This was my opportunity to pay it forward, to help someone who might be in the same situation I had found myself in not so long ago. "Tell her we'll work with her budget. And Alice, let's make sure we're thorough. I know all too well what it's like to be on the other side of this conversation." Alice's grin widened. "Knew you'd say that. You're a good person, you know." "Try telling that to my ex," I quipped, a wry smile crossing my lips as I turned back to the files on my desk. My smile didn't reach my eyes as the case unfolded in typical fashion for our detective agency: infidelity, secrets, and lies. These were patterns I had grown all too familiar with. Yet, with each case we closed, I felt a piece of myself heal, a validation of my choice to start anew. One morning, as the city was just beginning to stir, an elderly woman burst into my office, her distress palpable. She was in the midst of a heated discussion with my receptionist, ranting about her son's wife who had vanished, taking a considerable amount of money with her and leaving them in financial disarray. She demanded to speak with the owner, mentioning she needed a payment plan. Curiosity piqued, and I decided to meet her myself. To my astonishment, I came face to face with Marilyn, my former mother-in-law. The surprise in her eyes mirrored my own, but she quickly masked it with embarrassment. "I run this agency, Marilyn. How can I help?" I managed, my voice steady despite the inner turmoil. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by a hint of shame. Yet, driven by desperation, she was bold. "Emma, you have to help me find her. The woman who ran off with my son's money. Bobby's in shambles. Do it for the family's sake, without charge." The audacity of her request left me momentarily speechless. The same woman who had sided with Bobby unconditionally was now in my office, asking for a favor as if the past had never occurred. "Marilyn, first, we're not family. Second, I run a business, not a charity for wayward ex-in-laws," I replied, my tone firm. "But Emma, after everything, can't you do this one thing?" "It's the least you could do," she pressed, her voice a mix of pleading and demand. I couldn't help but laugh, albeit bitterly. "The least I could do, Marilyn? After your son cheated on me, you expect me to just forgive and forget? I suggest you go to the police. They're better equipped to handle missing persons and fraud." She stood there, flabbergasted, as if the thought of me refusing her had never crossed her mind. "But Emma, no, Marilyn. I learned a valuable lesson from Bobby and from you. Never to trust scammers and liars. It's time you learned the same." I interrupted, my decision final. Life indeed comes full circle, but it's up to us to decide how we close that loop. For me, it was by standing firm in my values and looking forward, not back. A week had barely passed since Marilyn's visit when my phone buzzed with a number I thought I'd erased from my life. Seeing Bobby's name flash on the screen was like stepping back into a world I had left behind. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Bobby, what do you want?" My tone was guarded, bracing for whatever spiel he had prepared. "Emma, I've been thinking a lot. I want us to start over, get back together, have kids, you know." His voice carried that old familiar blend of hope and what I once mistook for sincerity. I couldn't help but snort. "Really? And where would we live in this fantasy of yours?" His reply was tinged with excitement. "Oh, it's all planned out. We'll live with my mom at first, save some money, then you can buy us a big house. It'll be perfect." I laughed louder this time, the absurdity of the situation striking me fully. "You're just as arrogant as ever, Bobby. You think I'd come back just to play house with you and your mom, and then foot the bill for a big house?" He stumbled over his words, the desperation clear in his voice. "But Emma, I've changed. We can fix everything. Please." Bobby's plea hung in the air, a faint echo of desperation that could no longer reach me. I paused, reflecting on the years I had wasted, the tears I had shed, and the painstaking journey I had undertaken to rebuild myself from the wreckage he had left behind. "Bobby, you haven't changed a bit."
Goodbye.
With that, I hung up, the click of the phone line cutting off not just our conversation but also the lingering ties to a past that had tried to define me. As the quiet settled around me, a profound sense of peace enveloped my heart. The call, absurd as it was, served as the ultimate validation of my growth, my resilience, and my independence. I had built a new life and a thriving career, and reclaimed my sense of self, achievements that would have been unattainable had I remained trapped in a marriage that stifled and diminished me. Bobby's call turned out to be nothing more than a minor disturbance, a fleeting reminder of how far I had come. The future lay ahead, bright and brimming with promise, like a blank canvas ready to be adorned with new dreams, new challenges, and fresh achievements. Turning my attention back to the work that had given me purpose and a sense of belonging, I felt a surge of readiness for whatever lay ahead. After all, the best revenge is living well, and I was fully intent on doing just that. The work ahead was not just a job, it was a testament to my journey, a reflection of the strength I had garnered and the new paths I was eager to explore. My heart was steady, my resolve firm, and my life unequivocally my own. My life has unfolded through a series of unexpected events and fortunate encounters. Losing my parents at a young age was devastating, yet fate smiled on me when the elderly Parkers next door embraced me as if I were their grandchild. They provided a home filled with immense love and warmth, though not much wealth, which was more than enough for me. As I grew up and reached the age of 19, ready to explore college opportunities, tragedy struck again. The Parkers passed away in a sudden car accident. Suddenly, I found myself alone once more. They left me a modest sum for my education and their suburban house, a quaint and memory-filled abode. However, it felt too haunted by the past for me to remain, so I sold it and moved into a small apartment in the city, close to the college where I pursued a degree in financial management. College was challenging yet engaging, and I dedicated myself to mastering the intricacies of finance and markets. After graduation, I secured a decent job where my days were filled with activity. Yet, the city nights felt strangely lonely despite the crowds. That loneliness faded when I met Saint at a friend's gathering. He was outgoing, humorous, and effortlessly charming. Our first interaction was memorable. He accidentally spilled my drink, and in his straightforward, carefree manner, quickly offered to replace it. We connected instantly, finding common ground in our shared interests and easy conversations. A year into our relationship, Saint proposed in the most understated yet perfect way for us. No grand gestures, just him, me, and a ring clumsily presented during a quiet evening at home. Our marriage didn't alter much in our lives. It simply solidified the bond we already cherished. We continued to live in my city apartment, now sharing the serene moments together. Life seemed wonderfully stable, and soon, I found another family in Saint's parents, the Tysons. They were warm and welcoming, making me feel loved and appreciated from the start. We enjoyed weekends filled with laughter, barbecues, and cozy coffee chats at their home. However, life has its way of challenging us when least expected. Saint had to leave for a year-long business assignment out of state, which coincided with a sudden decline in Mr. Tyson's health. Mrs. Tyson's distress during this tough time was palpable, and I felt compelled to support them as much as I could, even in Saint's absence. The cycle of support and love continued, showing that while life can be unpredictable and challenging, the connections we make can offer profound comfort and resilience. Without hesitation, I packed my bags and headed to the suburbs after receiving the call from Mrs. Tyson. Her voice was laden with emotion as she explained that Tyson, her husband, was severely ill. When I arrived and saw Mr. Tyson looking so fragile and connected to numerous medical devices, it was a stark contrast to the strong, steady man I remembered. I quickly adapted to the rhythm of their household, taking over the cooking and cleaning duties so Mrs. Tyson could devote her energy to caring for Tyson. In the evenings, I would sit by Mr. Tyson's side, reading aloud from his favorite classic novels, although he often fell asleep before I finished a chapter. On his better days, he would weakly thank me, his voice barely a whisper of its usual strength. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, Mrs. Tyson joined me in the kitchen looking visibly distressed and much older than her years. She confessed that they were facing financial difficulties since Tyson had been the main breadwinner. She hesitantly suggested that I could help by renting out my apartment in the city. Without a second thought, I agreed to help alleviate their burden. The apartment was rented out quickly, and I began sending the rental income to Mrs. Tyson, along with additional funds to cover groceries and other bills. The commute to my job in the city turned arduous, but I reminded myself that family supports each other, a mantra I held on to even during the toughest days. Mrs. Tyson frequently expressed her gratitude, calling me a godsend. I reassured her that it's simply what family does. Yet, some nights, as I lay in the guest room listening to distant city sirens, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Saint's phone calls were my only solace, his voice connecting me to a different life. He would check in on me, always concerned, but I kept my tone cheerful to avoid adding to his worries. Life in the Tyson household became even more complicated when Joanna, Mrs. Tyson's daughter from a previous marriage, arrived unexpectedly. Her presence was chilling, like a cold draft sneaking under a door. Joanna had a distant and strained relationship with Mr. Tyson, and her sudden appearance added tension to an already stretched situation. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, Mr. Tyson motioned for me to come closer. His voice was hoarse and urgent as he warned me about Joanna, describing her as untrustworthy. I assured him that I would be cautious, though I wasn't entirely sure of the specifics of the threat he perceived. True to Mr. Tyson's warnings, Joanna quickly began to assert her influence, altering the dynamics of the household as if she had every right to do so. Her actions made it clear that she intended to stay and take control, which added a new layer of stress to my already heavy load. One morning, I encountered Joanna in the kitchen, her presence casting a shadow like a storm cloud over the breakfast nook. With a sharp tone and a dismissive glance, she made her intentions clear. "Just so we're clear, I'm not here to play housemaid or chef for anyone," she stated bluntly, sipping her coffee and eyeing me as though I was an unwanted guest in her mother's kitchen. Taken aback yet striving to maintain harmony, I responded calmly, "Okay, Joanna, I've been managing things so far, and I can continue to do so." "Good, because I don't plan on lifting a finger. This is Mom's house, after all," she retorted, her gaze challenging me to contradict her. From that day forward, Joanna's presence became increasingly burdensome. She would order takeout just for herself and her mother, carelessly leaving the empty containers for me to clean up. Her disdain was palpable, and although it stung, I endured it for the sake of Mr. Tyson's peace. One evening, Mrs. Tyson, reminiscent of her former kindness, invited me to join them for dinner. Before I could accept, Joanna interjected sharply, "Mom, Maeve's been busy all day. She probably prefers eating later." Her tone was laced with feigned concern, but the underlying message was clear: I was not welcome. As days passed, my responsibilities seemed to double under Joanna's reign of entitlement. I would often hear her late at night, whispering with her mother, sowing seeds of discord against me. Gradually, Mrs. Tyson's demeanor cooled, her gratitude less frequent, and her expressions more reserved. When Mr. Tyson passed away, the funeral was a subdued gathering, with Saint returning just in time to bid his father farewell. The comfort of having him by my side during such a sorrowful time was a significant relief. Yet, amidst the mourning, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere at the Tyson residence. Joanna displayed exceptional politeness, a stark contrast to her usual demeanor. "How's everything been while I've been gone?" Saint asked during a quiet moment after the service. "Fine. Everything's been fine," I lied, masking my true feelings with a forced smile, unwilling to burden him further amidst his grief. "You sure? You look a bit worn out," he pressed, his concern evident. "It's just been busy, helping out around here," I reassured him, avoiding his gaze. It wasn't the time to discuss the underlying turmoil. As soon as Saint departed, Joanna reverted to her true self, the pretense of a dutiful sister discarded for a sneering, dismissive attitude. The household dynamics shifted dramatically. Mrs. Tyson, possibly overwhelmed by her grief, grew distant and cold. Commands replaced the warm conversations we once had, making me feel more like an intruder than a family member. Joanna assumed control of the household, acting as though she were the lady of the manor. Her reign was characterized by a complete disregard for anyone's feelings but her own. She began intruding into my room without permission, rummaging through my belongings as if searching for hidden treasures. One afternoon, seeking solace in the garden, I stumbled upon a box hidden among the shrubs. Curiosity piqued. I opened it to find my watches, jewelry, and even some personal items. Nearby, several of my dresses were carelessly draped over a bush. A surge of fury overwhelmed me as I gathered my belongings, clutching the box tightly. I stormed into the living room, finding Joanna sprawled on the couch as if she owned everything around her. "What the hell, Joanna?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "You can't just throw my stuff outside." Joanna's laugh cut through the tension, a cold and harsh sound that seemed to mock my distress. "Live here? Please, you're just a guest, and not a welcome one. You should be out in the garden or better yet on the street. You're nothing but a ruthless beggar anyway." Her words were like salt on an open wound, and I was stunned by the venom in her voice. Trembling, I turned to Mrs. Tyson, who had just walked into the room, hoping for some support. "Mrs. Tyson, please, tell her she can't treat me like this. This is supposed to be my home too," I pleaded, my voice cracking under the emotional strain. Mrs. Tyson, once a figure of kindness and warmth, now looked through me as if I were invisible. "This is Joanna's house now," she stated flatly. "She's right, Maeve. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." Her words hit me like a physical blow, and I stood there, box in hand, heart-shattering. Despite the crushing betrayal, I stayed, clinging to a promise I made to Mr. Tyson on his deathbed, to look after his wife and not let Joanna overpower her. But as days passed, Mrs. Tyson seemed to adopt Joanna's cruel demeanor, her words turning sharp and her gaze cold. "You're just sitting on your hands here, aren't you?" Mrs. Tyson snapped one evening as I cleaned up after dinner. Her voice was thick with disdain. "I'm doing my best to keep things running smoothly," I replied, struggling to keep my composure amid the hurt her words caused. "Best?
Could have fooled me."
Seems like you're just freeloading," she scoffed before turning away and leaving the room. Her accusations stung deeply. Far from freeloading, I had rented out my apartment and transferred nearly all of that income to her, on top of handling most of the housework, while Joanna did nothing but criticize. Joanna, living comfortably off her mother's pension, was relentless in her taunts. "Really? What did my brother even see in you?" She would mock me night after night, her voice carrying easily through the thin walls. I swallowed the anger and frustration, reminding myself of the promise I made to Mr. Tyson. But the atmosphere was suffocating, a minefield of hostility. One evening, coming home early from work, my world tilted on its axis. I walked in to hear Joanna and Mrs. Tyson in the middle of a heated discussion in the living room, not noticing my arrival. "We need to get her to sell that apartment of hers. You know how much we could use that money," Joanna was saying, her tone greedy and calculating. "Yes, but how do we convince her?" "Maeve's no fool. She won't just hand it over," Mrs. Tyson replied, her voice a mix of frustration and greed. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll sweet-talk her into it. Once she signs it over, we can finally live the way we deserve," Joanna plotted. Hearing them scheme to strip me of my only financial security was a chilling dose of reality. Fear gripped me. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. My heart pounding, I slipped away to my room unnoticed, their plotting echoing in my ears. I hurriedly packed my essentials, my hands shaking with every fold and stow. Every second in that house now felt like a countdown to disaster. I didn't bother with goodbyes. They didn't deserve them. Slipping out the back door, I made my escape, leaving behind the house that was no longer a home. I ordered a taxi and soon found myself on a train heading to Saint State. Doubts clouded my mind. Would Saint understand my sudden departure, or would he take their side? The uncertainty was overwhelming, but the fear of what could happen if I stayed behind was even more daunting. As the train sped away, the landscape outside the window blurred, mirroring the mix of fear and resolve in my heart. Arriving at Saint's place, I was a bundle of nerves. His expression was a mix of shock and relief as he opened the door to find me on his doorstep, bag in hand, visibly upset. "Maeve, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. No, Saint, everything's not okay. Not at all, I managed to say, my voice catching. He led me to the couch, his face etched with concern.
Talk to me, babe.
What happened? I poured out everything: Joanna's return, the escalating tensions at home, the financial schemes, and the last straw: their plot to make me sell my apartment. I had kept it all to myself, not wanting to burden him with additional stress while he was away working. With each word, Saint's expression grew darker. By the time I finished, his fists were clenched, and his jaw was set hard. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? He asked, his voice a blend of anger and concern. I didn't want to cause more trouble. I thought I could handle it, I admitted, feeling somewhat foolish now. Maeve, damn it, you shouldn't have to handle anything like that alone, he exploded, standing up to pace the room. I can't believe my mom and Joanna would treat you this way. He stopped and fixed me with an intense look. I'm not letting anyone treat my wife like that, no way, he declared, pulling out his phone. My heart pounded as he dialed his mother's number. The phone barely rang twice before she picked up. I couldn't hear her words, but Saint's tense shoulders spoke volumes. Mom, this has to stop. I know about everything, and I won't tolerate it. If Joanna doesn't leave, and if you don't start treating Maeve with respect, you can forget about us helping out anymore. No more money, no more nothing, Saint said firmly, leaving no room for argument. After a brief but fiery exchange, there was silence. Saint's hand tightened around the phone. Fine, if that's your choice, then you've made mine, he said finally and hung up. He turned to me, his expression softening. Looks like it's just us now, babe. That's all we need, he said, coming over to wrap me in his arms. I leaned into him, the safety of his embrace fortifying me against the whirlwind of emotions. Just us, I murmured, feeling the truth of his words. We were on our own now, but somehow that felt okay. Saint and I talked long into the night. We discussed practical warners like my arrangements for remote work and our financial plans without the extra burden of supporting his mother and Joanna. It felt like we were laying the foundations for a new chapter, just the two of us. Whatever happens, we're in this together. You and me against the world, right? Saint said with a determined grin. Right, I smiled back, feeling more confident with him by my side. Over the next few days, we were a whirlwind of activity. I contacted my job to arrange remote work, which they thankfully agreed to. Saint helped me move my things from storage and set up a home office in the corner of his living room. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. A week into our newfound peace, I was startled by a call that felt like an echo from a past life. It was Mrs. Tyson, and her voice, which once sounded sweet, now carried a mix of desperation and audacity. Maeve, why haven't I received the money for this month? You know we depend on it, she demanded from the start. I was taken aback, silent for a moment at her nerve. I'm sorry, but after everything, you really expect me to continue supporting you? I asked, my tone more incredulous than angry. In the background, I could hear Joanna's shrill and angry voice. She's just an ungrateful girl. Mom, make her transfer the money. Taking a deep breath to calm my rising anger, I remembered the venomous words they had thrown at me, words that stung deep. Mrs. Tyson, Joanna called me a ruthless beggar, remember? I'm not sending money to people who treat me like trash. I'm done. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost picture Mrs. Tyson's shocked face. But we're family, she finally said, her voice a mix of anger and pleading. No, family doesn't treat each other that way. Goodbye, Mrs. Tyson, I said firmly and hung up before she could respond. The call shook me, but Saint was right there, his support unwavering.
You did the right thing, Maeve.
It's time they learn to stand on their own, he reassured me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Not long after settling back into our hometown, another surprise came our way. I was pregnant. The news brought a joy we hadn't expected, and suddenly the future seemed filled with possibilities. We decided it was time to sell my apartment and buy a small house in the suburbs near a good school where our child could grow up. As we were planning our move, another call came, again from Mrs. Tyson. Her tone was different this time, desperate and almost pitiful. Maeve, I've made a mistake. Joanna forced me to sell the house, took the money, and left me with nothing. Could I come and live with you and Saint? Her voice was shaky, pleading. The request stunned me. After everything, this was a test of my resolve. Mrs. Tyson, you chose this path when you sided with Joanna against us. You could have chosen differently, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I know I've made mistakes, but you have a kind heart. Can't you forgive an old woman for her wrong choices? She implored. I sighed, feeling a pang of pity, but remembering the pain her choices had caused. I forgave you long ago, but that doesn't mean I can let you back into my life. You need to live with the consequences of your actions, just as I have, I replied and ended the call. Then, with a resolute tap, I blocked her number. We moved forward with our plans, purchasing a quaint house with a little garden where our child could play. It was a lazy Sunday morning, the kind where you linger over coffee and the newspaper. I was flipping through the pages when a headline caught my eye, local woman arrested for massive fraud scheme. There, staring back at me from the paper, was Joanna, handcuffed and looking defeated. I couldn't help the mix of shock and, admittedly, a slight vindication that washed over me. Look at this, Saint, I called out, holding up the newspaper for him to see. It's Joanna. She's been arrested for fraud. Saint took the newspaper, scanning the article with a serious expression. Wow. Can't say I'm surprised, he said, a hint of vindication in his voice too. The news about Joanna's consequences brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed until now. Over time, we learned through mutual friends that Mrs. Tyson was now living in a modest apartment, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Her pension fell short of covering her living expenses and the debts Joanna had burdened her with. One evening, while Saint and I were hosting a backyard barbecue, his friend Warren broached the subject. Did you hear about your mom? He asked as Saint tended to the grill. Yeah, I heard, Saint replied, his voice carrying a hint of sadness, but also a firm resolve. She chose her path, Warren. It's tough, but that's how it is. Warren nodded, acknowledging the complex situation without pressing further. You're right, man. Just thought you should know. The conversation soon drifted towards lighter topics, sports and work, as the evening unfolded. Life continued to move forward, and our joy deepened when we welcomed our daughter into the world. Becoming parents to Mia transformed everything. It shifted our priorities and dreams, and even seemed to heal old wounds by filling them with this new, overwhelming love. Can you believe she's ours? I whispered to Saint one night as we watched Mia sleeping peacefully in her crib. She's perfect, Maeve. Just perfect, Saint murmured back, his voice laden with emotion. We spent our days captivated by every one of Mia's milestones, each smile, each giggle. She was our little miracle. With her arrival, the pains of the past began to fade, making way for new, joyful memories. Each day was simple, yet it was rich with moments that wove together into a tapestry of a contented family life. This new chapter, marked by love and simplicity, showed us that while the past might shape us, the future was ours to define, filled with the promise of healing and the joy of a new beginning. From a young age, I understood my place in the family hierarchy. My name is Stella, but most people call me Stella. I am the younger daughter in a family that, from the outside, might seem like your typical middle-class household. My older sister, Delilah, or Delilah as we call her, was always the shining star. 2 years my senior, she was endowed with golden locks that captured the sunlight perfectly in photographs, which our mother was always eager to share on social media or add to the family album. Although I was not without my charms, sporting dark hair, hazel eyes, and a distinctive look my aunt admired as interesting, in our home, being interesting was insufficient. Delilah was the benchmark of excellence, and I merely existed in her shadow. The favoritism displayed by our parents was unmistakable. Shopping sprees were reserved for Delilah's wardrobe needs, while my necessities were often postponed with a maybe next month, sweetie. Delilah received the larger bedroom for her academic needs and was gifted a car on her 15th birthday. I, on the other hand, received a watch, not even an impressive one. The disparity became painfully clear during our high school graduations. Delilah's graduation was marked by a lavish celebration, and our father announced they would finance her college education as she pursued a career in cake, proudly following in his footsteps. Cheers were raised for her prospective success. 2 years later, when I graduated with superior grades, the scene at our kitchen table was markedly different. As I laid out my college acceptance letters, my parents shared uneasy glances. "Honey," my mother began, avoiding eye contact, "we just can't afford college right now. The market's tough with Delilah's tuition." My father suggested I work to save money for my education. That night, devastated, I cried myself to sleep, vowing it would be the last time their favoritism would affect me so deeply. Determined, I began job hunting the following morning and soon secured a position as a cleaning at the Grand Plaza Hotel, our city's most prestigious hotel. While Delilah returned home after college to save money, I moved into a modest studio apartment across town. Living independently was challenging at first, but the freedom from constant comparison was refreshing. My modest home was truly my own, and each evening, exhausted yet fulfilled, I felt a surge of pride in my self-sufficiency. At work, I embraced every task as a chance to learn everything about the hotel receptionist. My diligence did not go unnoticed. "Stella, you're the only one who consistently gets perfect room inspection scores," Mrs. Natalie, the head house cook, remarked after just 4 months. My approach was simple. Treat every room as if I were the guest. This ethos not only earned me a promotion within 3 months, but also introduced me to intriguing individuals like Angel, a distinguished guest in room 964, who noticed my exceptional service. His acknowledgement was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where my efforts were recognized and valued, irrespective of the shadows cast by familial expectations. One morning, while I was overseeing the 7th floor's cleaning, a guest caught my attention. "Miss, could I have a word?" he called out. What began as a simple query about extra towels evolved into a quarter-hour discussion on hotel operations. Day after day, our paths crossed, until on his 5th day, he casually invited me to dinner. "There's a lovely restaurant downtown," he suggested. Standing firm, I met his gaze and responded, "Mr. Richardson, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in any short-term relationships during your stay." He took my refusal with a chuckle. "Fair enough, but the invitation for dinner still stands. Nothing more." I declined respectfully, yet firmly, and throughout his 5-week stay, he remained amiable and respectful. Upon his departure, Mr. Richardson left me his business card, which I stowed away, thinking little of it. However, within weeks, my career began to accelerate unexpectedly. First, I was offered a front desk position, then rapidly ascended to lead the registration team, and soon after, became the assistant manager. Within just 4 months of Mr. Richardson's leave, I found myself managing the entire front office. The swift progression left me bewildered, although I knew my capabilities. Whispers and rumors began to circulate soon after. "She must be involved with Mr. Andrew." One concierge speculated to another, suggesting our hotel's owner was the reason for my rapid promotions. "Did you see how quickly she climbed the ladder? That doesn't happen without some sort of favor," they insinuated. Despite my efforts to disregard these whispers, they hurt. I had earned every promotion through hard work, dedication, and a thorough understanding of hotel operations, yet rumors painted a different picture, one where my advancement was due to a supposed liaison with Mr. Andrew, whom I had barely met. One Monday, a sudden summons from Mr. Andrew's secretary had me apprehensive about potential bad news. I entered his office at the appointed time, finding him, a tall man in his 30s with discerning eyes, shuffling papers. "You've done exceptional work, Stella," he began, but there's an issue we need to address about your role as front office manager. My heart sank, anticipating the revelation of my perceived underqualification. It's time for you to go to college, Stella, he announced unexpectedly. Confused, I blinked. The hotel will accommodate your schedule, of course. We want you to pursue your degree while maintaining your position here. His words, far from what I had feared, spun my head in a wholly different direction, offering an unexpected but welcome twist to my career path. I was at a loss for words when my boss unexpectedly thanked me. He grinned as he reached into his desk drawer. I don't usually listen to others when it comes to staffing decisions, but someone convinced me to keep an eye on you, he explained as he handed me a business card. The phone number on it looked familiar. It was the same one Mr. Richardson had given me several months earlier. Later that evening, as I sat in my apartment, I gazed at the card for what seemed like an eternity. With trembling hands, I finally picked up my phone and dialed the number. I've been expecting your call. A familiar voice greeted me warmly after just 2 rings. Are you friends with Mr. Andrews? I inquired, my voice shaky. Angel laughed softly. We go back 30 years. When I recommend someone, he trusts my judgment. And just so you know, all your promotions were based on your own merit. I merely suggested he recognize your potential. We talked deep into the night. He shared how, during his time observing my work, he had been impressed by my keen eye for detail and innate leadership skills. I reminded him of his younger self, he said, with a similar zeal to overcome any challenge. A couple of days later, we revisited the restaurant where we first met. This time, I enrolled in a college program for hotel and restaurant management, inspired by our conversations. Angel was a pillar of support, offering both emotional and practical help. He shared invaluable business insights that went beyond any textbook. Our relationship evolved effortlessly. There were no grand gestures or pivotal moments. We simply grew closer each day. Move in with me, he proposed casually one evening as we enjoyed the view from his penthouse balcony. 3 months after that initial phone call, we were married in an intimate, stylish ceremony. I moved from my small studio to his luxurious penthouse. You've really hit the jackpot, my friend Anna remarked during one of our coffee meetups. Successful, handsome, and genuinely kind. Men like that are rare. She wasn't wrong. Angel supported my studies, celebrated my professional successes, and always made me feel valued, a stark contrast to my childhood experiences. Our happiness seemed to stir up the dynamics at family gatherings. My sister Delilah, who had always been the center of attention, now seemed to struggle with her personal life despite a thriving career. I often caught her eyeing Angel and me with envy during our family dinners. The same sister who had once ignored me was now unable to hide her jealousy. Despite her constant need for attention, I couldn't help but notice Delilah closely scrutinizing my ring throughout the entire Christmas dinner. Angel later commented on it, saying, "Did you see how intently Delilah was looking at your ring? It was as if she wanted to bore a hole through it with her gaze." It's true, Delilah has always been accustomed to having the finest things, and I sighed, realizing she was struggling with not being the focus of everyone's attention anymore. The tension only escalated when my parents began their mission to find Delilah a husband. At every family gathering, my mother would take me aside and, in her overly sweet voice, hint, "Surely Angel has some nice, single friends. Delilah isn't getting any younger, you know." My father was more straightforward, often saying, "Your sister deserves someone successful, like Angel. You should help her out. That's what families do." The irony of their words was not lost on me, especially considering these were the same parents who had not supported my education financially, but now wanted to leverage my connections for their favorite daughter. During an Easter dinner, Delilah cornered me in the kitchen and bluntly asked, "Why haven't you introduced me to any of Angel's friends?" I took a moment to really look at her. Her appearance was as flawless as ever, but there was a new desperation in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Maybe because I don't want to manage someone else's romantic life," I responded cautiously. "Besides, relationships aren't just about finding someone wealthy." Delilah snapped back, frustrated. "Easy for you to say. You already landed a rich husband." I walked away from that conversation with a firm resolve to maintain my distance. Delilah's approach to finding a wealthy partner made me uncomfortable. It seemed more like a hunt for a prize rather than a search for genuine affection. I thought I had found my fairy tale ending, but over the next 4 years, subtle changes began to surface. Angel started coming home later, and his business trips became more frequent. Initially, I excused his absences. Busy periods at work were understandable, but his constant delays and excuses began to wear thin. "Sorry, darling, emergency board meeting," he would text, missing another dinner I had prepared. "This trip might extend to 5 weeks," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. Our penthouse felt increasingly empty, the echo of my heels a stark reminder of my solitude. One night, I decided it was time for a candid conversation. I waited up for him, ready to address our issues. When he arrived home at 10:10 p.m., his expression was distant and cold. "Angel, we need to talk," I said, determined. "Yes, we do," he replied, his tone detached. What followed seemed like a scene from someone else's life, not mine. "I want a divorce," he stated emotionlessly. "I don't love you anymore. In fact, I'm not sure I ever did." His words felt like a physical blow. I stammered, "Angel, if there's a problem, we can fix it. There's always something to work on." "There's nothing to work on, Stella. It's over. My lawyer will contact you," he said, his decision final. Everything moved swiftly after that, and within days, our lives together began to unravel. I received divorce papers unexpectedly, which made me realize that the prenuptial agreement I had signed, thinking it was just a routine document, left me with no rights to any assets, not our shared apartment, not any of his wealth, nor even the furniture we had chosen together. In shock, I quickly packed my belongings into 1 suitcases. With no place else to go, I reluctantly called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I need to stay with you for a bit," I managed to say, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "Just until I sort things out." The ensuing silence was a clear warning of their reaction. "Oh, honey," my mom responded with insincere sympathy, "we're in the middle of renovations. The guest room is a mess." I suggested sleeping on the sofa, but my dad interjected, "The living room's being painted, and you know our house isn't big." Their endless excuses, each more feeble than the last, stung me deeply, especially their thinly veiled pleasure at my misfortune. Forced to start over, I found a modest apartment across town and threw myself into work, but nothing seemed to go right. My reports were constantly returned for revisions, and my decisions were always second-guessed. Eventually, Mr. Andrew, my former mentor, called me into his office, avoiding eye contact. "Stella," he said, fidgeting with papers, "perhaps it's time you considered other opportunities. We'll gladly give you a reference." The loss of my job compounded the sense of abandonment from my family, plunging me into a deep depression. For weeks, I scarcely left my bed, and the silence from my family was crushing. Not one call or message to see if I was even alive. One morning, my friend Anna burst into my apartment with coffee and bagels, determined to lift my spirits. "This isn't you, Stella," she insisted. As she threw open the curtains, she continued, "The Stella I know is a fighter. The one who rose from a cleaning to management, who worked her way through college while holding a full-time job. That Stella is still here." Her words sparked something in me. Despite the prenuptial agreement, I had wisely saved money, living frugally and always preparing for the unexpected. One restless night, an idea struck me. With my extensive experience in hospitality, from housekeeping to front office management, I knew the industry inside out. "I'm going to open my own hotel," I announced to Anna over breakfast the next day. She was startled by my ambition. "It's a big leap," she said, nearly spitting out her coffee. "I've saved enough for startup costs, and I'll look for investors," I declared, already planning on my phone. I immersed myself in research, developed a comprehensive business plan, and began networking. At a charity event for emerging entrepreneurs, I connected with 2 investors who were intrigued by my concept for a boutique hotel that would meld luxury with personalized service. The first year was grueling. I manned the reception desk by day, handled paperwork by night, and covered for any staff absence, even spending days doing housekeeping when necessary. But this time, every moment of exhaustion felt worthwhile. My success felt profoundly different. It was truly mine. Over time, I had been gradually building a business that became a triumph of perseverance and dedication. Our hotel became known for its exceptional personal service and meticulous attention to detail. By the third year, we were making a profit, and by the fifth year, I had repaid all my investors, making the hotel entirely my own. During this period of success, my family had distanced themselves, cutting ties so thoroughly that it was as if I had never been part of their lives. There were no more invitations to holiday gatherings or family events. Initially, this rejection was painful, but over time, I came to see their absence as a blessing. It freed me from constant comparisons, subtle criticisms, and the persistent feeling of inadequacy. Occasionally, I would glance at my cousin Delilah's social media updates. Old habits are hard to break. I saw that she had achieved her dream of marrying wealthy and was now flaunting designer clothes for her baby and sharing photos from lavish vacations. As time flew by, our hotel didn't just succeed. It became a sought-after destination in the city for those who valued luxury combined with a personal touch. Travel bloggers often highlighted our distinctive service. Feeling a sense of gratitude and responsibility, I suggested to my management team that we organize something meaningful for the community. This led to the conception of our first charity gala to support educational scholarships for disadvantaged students, a cause close to my heart given my own educational journey. The gala transformed our grand ballroom into a dazzling venue and attracted local celebrities, business leaders, and media coverage. It was a huge success, significantly raising both funds and awareness. Following the gala, I found myself thrust into the public eye. 5 days later, an unexpected call came from the front desk. My parents were there, insisting on seeing me. Composing myself, I approached the lobby. They appeared older and still carried an air of entitlement. My mother attempted a warm greeting, which I cautiously avoided, and asked why they were there. My father, feigning hurt, expressed a desire to reconnect now that I was successful. I couldn't hide my skepticism, recalling their lack of support through my hardest times. The conversation turned when my mother mentioned that Delilah was struggling, her partner had left her, and she was raising her child alone without support. She hinted that I could intervene with the baby's father. I found the request absurd, wondering why he would listen to me. Their visit, it seemed, was not just a bid for reconciliation but also an attempt to seek help for Delilah. The encounter was a stark reminder of the complex dynamics of family relationships, where old patterns can resurface even in new chapters of life. I couldn't comprehend the situation as my mother casually dropped the bombshell about Angel, the man I once called my husband. Suddenly, the room felt like it had stopped spinning as I pieced together the confusing jigsaw of my life. The unexpected richness of my sister's mysterious boyfriend, my parents' unusual aloofness, and the disastrous timing of my career nosedive. Angels? I muttered under my breath, as the reality dawned on me with a clarity that stung sharply. It wasn't planned, my mom retorted defensively, as if the randomness of the situation absolved all betrayal. These things just happen, she added. These things just happen? My voice escalated in disbelief. My husband and my sister? And you chose a side. Delilah and Angel fell in love, my dad explained, as though it justified their actions. We couldn't just pick sides, but their neutrality was a facade. You did take sides. You isolated me. When I needed you most, you turned your backs on me. My voice broke the silence with a raw edge of accusation. Stop being so dramatic, my mom sighed, dismissing my pain. In the end, it all worked out. Look at you, owning a hotel. So, Angel did me a favor by having me fired because Delilah felt uncomfortable working with me. I stared at my parents, finally seeing them not as the protectors I thought they were, but as collaborators in the ruin of my life. Leave, I said quietly. Stella, don't do this, my mom began. Leave. My command boomed, and my security personnel appeared instantly. These people are not welcome here, I instructed them, my voice trembling with anger. You're being ungrateful. My dad started, but he was cut off as the guards escorted them out. You'll regret this, my mom yelled back. Family is all you have. No, I called out after them. Family should love and protect you. You're not my family. You just happened to raise me. That was the last interaction I had with my parents. I learned through mutual friends and social media snippets about the subsequent fallout of Delilah and Angel's tumultuous split. She vented about him online, while he threatened legal action. Meanwhile, my parents' fortunes dwindled due to a poor investment, leading them to downsize significantly. In contrast, my life blossomed beautifully. 3 months ago, I met Silas at a conference. He's successful, genuinely loving, and appreciates me for who I am. We're planning to marry next spring. Some nights, I find myself scrolling through Delilah's bitter posts about Angel, chuckling over the ironic justice of their predicament. My sister, once smug with victory, now lamented her single motherhood, while Angel watched his reputation crumble. As for me, the sister they thought they had defeated, I was thriving. My hotel was expanding, and Silas and I were dreaming of our future. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't about getting even. It was about living well and watching karma unfold from afar, preferably with a glass of champagne in hand. Life has a peculiar way of challenging us when we're already feeling low. For me, Emily, this was especially true. At 27, I felt caught in a relentless whirlwind of chaos. My days were swallowed by a dull job that was about as stimulating as watching paint dry, and my evenings? They were consumed by endless arguments with Rowan, my boyfriend of 5 years. Rowan was a complex character. On his good days, he could make you laugh until it hurt. On his bad ones, he was a champion of indifference and sharp words. Our relationship was teetering on the edge, worn thin by too many pointless arguments, the kind we'd forget by the next morning. One lackluster Thursday night found us in our usual haunt, a tired diner where the air hung heavy with the scent of old grease and stale coffee. It was the perfect setting for yet another futile argument. Why must you always be so difficult, Emily? Rowan snapped, his patience fraying. Difficult? You're the one who's impossible to talk to. I shot back, my frustration mounting as our voices rose. We went back and forth like a carousel that had lost its luster, revisiting the same tired issues: money, commitment, the future. Our words cut deep, each remark more cutting than the last. Leaving the diner that evening, the chilly air did nothing to cool our heated tempers. We walked home in silence, each of us lost in our own brooding thoughts. Back at our cramped apartment, the silence stretched on. We seemed to have exhausted our words, leaving only the bitter taste of our disagreement and the relentless ticking of the clock, a stark reminder of the precious time we were wasting. Lying in bed, I wondered where things had gone wrong. Was this what my future held? Endless quarrels with a man who felt more like a stranger each day. The thought was claustrophobic, a suffocating pressure that made it difficult to breathe. In that moment of despair, I decided I couldn't continue this way. Change was essential, though I had no idea that life was already plotting a course that would alter everything in unimaginable ways. For now, though, I drifted into sleep while the gathering storm clouds of my life loomed, ready to burst. Just when I thought my situation couldn't worsen, tragedy struck. My parents and I were involved in a devastating car accident. In an instant, our conversation and laughter turned to chaos and agony. When I regained consciousness in the hospital, my world had shattered. My parents were gone, and I was left alone, my spine severely injured, my legs unresponsive. I couldn't envision any sort of future. My life, as I knew it, seemed finished. As I lay in the stark, sterile white of my hospital room, overwhelmed by loss and isolation, I began to contemplate the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a new beginning to be found amid the wreckage of my old life. The doctors, maintaining their composed expressions, shared that my path to recovery would be arduous, possibly without end. Rehabilitation will be a significant journey, they explained, their voices blending professional detachment with a hint of sympathy. In their silence, however, resonated a deeper, more daunting message. They were cautious not to foster false hope. During those countless, indistinct days shrouded in quiet despair, Rowan entered my room, his parents following closely. They wore the strained smiles of those trying to appear strong for someone else, their eyes overly bright. Rowan approached my bedside and paused, his gaze holding mine. In his eyes, I detected a resolve that unnerved me with its intensity. What could he possibly offer to lessen this nightmare? "Emily," he started, his voice faltering as if grappling with overwhelming emotions. "I know this might be the worst possible timing, and you're enduring an unimaginable ordeal, but I can't pretend any longer. My feelings for you are the most profound I've ever experienced." His declaration lingered, laden with gravity. Then, in an act of sheer spontaneity, Rowan knelt on the cold, hard floor of my hospital room. "I love you, Emily. More than anything or anyone. Marry me. Let me care for you. Stand by you through all this and whatever lies ahead." Behind him, his parents watched, tears glimmering in their eyes. His mother, dabbing at her eyes, nodded encouragingly towards me, while his father, a man of few words, silently placed a supportive hand on Rowan's shoulder. Overwhelmed, I was momentarily lost in a whirlwind of fear, love, uncertainty, and hope. Yet, as I looked into Rowan's earnest eyes, something within me shifted. "Yes," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "I'll marry you." The joy and relief that brightened Rowan's face were akin to dawn breaking after the darkest night. "We're going to look after you as if you were our own," his parents assured, drawing nearer. The wedding was modest, far from any fantasies I had entertained about my big day. Seated in my wheelchair, a complex mix of weariness and joy surged through me. Yet, seeing the genuine smiles and teary eyes of our small assembly of close friends and relatives, I felt a profound rightness in the moment. Standing hand in hand with Rowan, our vows transcended mere words. They were commitments spanning the uncertainties of my recovery and our shared future. As our lips met in a sealing kiss, for the first time since the accident, I dared to believe life wasn't over. It had simply veered onto an unexpected path, a path I wouldn't have to traverse alone. After marrying, we moved into a spacious house, thoughtfully modified for wheelchair accessibility, left to me by my parents. Initially, Rowan seemed dedicated, quitting his job to care for me, citing the substantial inheritance as sufficient for our needs. Yet, the care he promised seemed to diminish rapidly, raising unsettling questions about the future. Even though he didn't need to work, my life had become overwhelmingly difficult. I found myself doing everything alone, cooking, cleaning, and even struggling through daily baths. All this while Rowan, my husband, spent his days either glued to his computer playing games or out with friends at bars. He often came home late, drunk, and his words were harsh, labeling me a burden. It wasn't just Rowan. His parents, who once seemed loving, turned cold and disdainful after our wedding, treating me as if I were their son's big mistake. One day, I reached my breaking point. As I attempted to cook in the kitchen, Rowan sauntered in looking for a snack. Overwhelmed, I confronted him. "I can't believe you're just lounging around all day while I struggle with the basics." He dismissed my efforts with a roll of his eyes and a pull from a beer can, claiming, "Oh, come on, Emily. You act like you're the only one suffering. I gave up my job for you, remember?" "Gave up your job?" I retorted, "You call abandoning work a noble sacrifice, but all you do is waste your days while I'm left to handle everything here." I gestured around the kitchen, my voice breaking with emotion. He countered, getting louder and more defensive. "You think I enjoy having no life outside this house? You think I like seeing you struggle?" Our argument escalated quickly, filled with accusations and hurtful words until we were both too spent to continue. It was painfully clear that the man I had married and the family I thought I had joined were not the support system I needed, but rather obstacles in my already challenging life. Weeks passed, and the environment at home grew from uncomfortable to outright hostile. Rowan's parents, once pretenders of concern, now treated our home as if it were their own, ignoring all boundaries. They took over the living room, the TV blaring day and night, and even helped themselves to food without asking. My requests for peace were dismissed as overly sensitive by my mother-in-law. Amidst this chaos, I sought a moment of solace by looking through my mother's jewelry. Opening the treasured box, my heart sank as I discovered missing items, symbols of the little respect and privacy left in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. In the stillness of my home, I discovered that a cherished memento from my mother had vanished. Initially, the shock of losing it was quickly overtaken by a burning anger when, later that day, I noticed the very same necklace gracefully adorning my mother-in-law's neck. Confronting her, my voice quivered with fury and disbelief as I accused, "Those are my mother's pearls. How did you come to possess them?" Her response was a fleeting look of confusion tinged with guilt, swiftly replaced by defensive indignation. "Your mother's? Ridiculous. These pearls have been mine for years. Accusing me of theft is disgraceful." Her rebuttal, sharp and dismissive, only fueled my growing distrust of the people around me. It wasn't long before I observed other personal belongings disappearing, paintings that once decorated our walls, heirloom dishes from my family's collection. Each loss eroded my sense of security, leaving me increasingly isolated and betrayed. The breaking point came one evening when I caught my mother-in-law sneaking out with a suspiciously full, bulky black bag. Her furtive glances and hurried steps were telling. The following day, I couldn't hold back my questions any longer. "What was in that bag you took out last night? More of my belongings? More of my parents' memories that you feel entitled to?" Her reaction was a tangled web of defensiveness and guilt. "You've got it all wrong," she stuttered, avoiding my eyes. "I was just taking some things to donate." "Your accusations are deeply hurtful and totally unfounded." Despite her words, her evasive demeanor and the mounting evidence painted a clear picture of deceit. I felt like I was surrounded by scavengers, preying on the remnants of my past life and my family's legacy. This harsh realization was difficult to accept. Among the few bright spots in these trying times was my friend Avery, who had become more than just a companion. She was an ally in what felt increasingly like hostile territory. During one of her regular visits for my rehabilitation aid, a rare relief in my tension-filled days, I confided my darkest fears about my husband Rowan and his parents. The air grew heavy with the gravity of my revelations, laden with betrayal and apprehension. Avery's response was a blend of outrage and pragmatism. "Emily, we need undeniable proof. What if we set up some hidden cameras around the house to catch them red-handed?" Her proposal, though drastic, seemed like the only viable option in a sea of desperation.
We proceeded with the plan.
Avery expertly positioned tiny cameras in key spots throughout the house, her actions quick and discreet. The wait to check the footage was agonizing. When we finally reviewed the recordings, the depth of the betrayal I felt was overwhelming. The voices of Rowan and his parents discussing their schemes filled the room. It was Rowan's words that cut the deepest. "Once Emily is out of the way, in that institution, everything here will be ours. We'll live like kings." The cold laughter of his mother that followed was a grim echo of their greed. This episode of deception was a turning point, prompting me to reevaluate who I considered family and who was merely masquerading as such under my own roof. Our journey into the depths of this predicament has only just begun. The potential to benefit from her inheritance seemed vast, but what truly caught me off guard was the unexpected involvement of his ordinarily reticent father. "Keep quiet. We can't let her suspect anything until our plans are fully formed. The quicker she's out of the picture, the better," he whispered. Shocked, Avery and I shared a glance, both of us stunned. The truth hit me harder than I could have ever anticipated. They weren't merely pilfering from me. They were plotting my elimination, planning to cut me out of my own life completely. How could they harbor such malice? My voice was a faint murmur, pain and disbelief nearly rendering me mute. Avery, always my shield, gripped my hand tighter. "We won't let them succeed, Emily. You are not alone," she assured me, but the sheer magnitude of our next steps was overwhelming. A direct confrontation seemed perilous given their sinister intentions. "I need to think this through," I murmured, my mind racing. They believed they were manipulating me, but now the tables were turning. "We need a strategy to flip this situation on them." Avery's nod, filled with resolve, mirrored my determination. They had chosen the wrong person to cross. As we strategized, the audio recordings played on, a somber backdrop to our growing resolve. Every word from Rowan and his parents only fueled my will to fight back, to reclaim my life and dignity from those who so ruthlessly tried to take it from me. Dinner that night was like a charade that none of us wanted to partake in. Rowan and his parents acted as if all was normal, their glances heavy with secrets. Their feigned ignorance was almost offensive. As we sat there, the chasm between us grew. The sting of their deceit cut deeper with each conspiratorial glance they exchanged. Driven by a mixture of hurt and defiance, I finally addressed Rowan. "Look at me," I commanded, waiting for his undivided attention. His gaze met mine reluctantly. "Do you truly love me?" His response was delayed, his smile forced. "Of course, I love you. You're my wife," he said, but his words rang hollow, his smile a mere facade meant to placate. The next morning, the disappearance of the ramps felt like a descent into a nightmare. Stripped of my means of independence, I felt even more ensnared by those who wished to dominate me. At breakfast, I confronted them, my frustration boiling over. "Why remove the ramps? How am I supposed to move around now?" I demanded. "It's for your safety, dear," my mother-in-law cooed, her feigned concern as genuine as her counterfeit pearls. "We thought you might fall. It's for the best." Their words thinly disguised their true motive, to further isolate and incapacitate me. I met their faux innocence with silence, my quiet a prelude to the storm brewing within. Behind the scenes, I was mobilizing my counterattack. I contacted Disability Services and enlisted my lawyer. Their arrival was a jolt to Rowan and his father, their faces a mix of fear and disbelief as the service team commenced their assessment, noting the missing ramps. My lawyer, always composed and direct, wasted no time. "We're here for a thorough inventory check," he announced authoritatively. An inventory was made after Emily's parents passed. "We're here to ensure everything is as it should be." As the inventory proceeded, the extent of their betrayal unfolded, highlighting the gravity of their deceit and my determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. In the midst of turmoil, his methodical approach to checking each item against a thorough inventory list was a stark contrast to the emotional chaos enveloping us. As I noted the absence of my mother's cherished jewelry, my father's collection of fine suits, and the paintings that had brought history and culture to life on our walls, each loss struck a deep chord of betrayal. The missing antique dishes, treasured family heirlooms, underscored the depth of deceit we were entangled in. Once warm and caring, my in-laws now found themselves trapped by undeniable evidence of their greed. As the reality settled in, their shock morphed into desperation to salvage their dignity. Tears poured down my mother-in-law's face as she turned to me, her voice trembling. "We're so sorry, dear. It all just got out of hand. Please, can't we move past this?" Her husband, my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law, mirrored her plea, his voice laden with guilt. "We never meant to hurt you. It was foolishness, greed. Please forgive us." However, forgiveness was no longer an option. Their betrayal was too profound. They had attempted to strip away my dignity and independence. Standing firm, I addressed the police officers, presenting them with the detailed inventory and audio recordings, irrefutable proof of deceit. "These are the individuals responsible," I declared, my voice resolute, marking a definitive end to this chapter of my life. The court proceedings were swift, driven by compelling evidence. The judge's gavel delivered justice, sentencing them for their crimes and mandating restitution for the stolen items, alongside compensation for those items lost forever. Watching them face the consequences brought a complex mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The divorce from Rowan was both freeing and painful, and I pursued legal compensation for the mistreatment, a formal recognition of the pain inflicted upon me. Throughout the trials, my testimony remained firm, a cathartic release from the pain and betrayal I had endured. Now, as I sat on the courthouse steps, a sense of closure enveloped me. The journey had tested my resilience and strength, leaving me with a mix of pride and disbelief. My recovery was uncertain, yet I was making strides, literally and figuratively, that once seemed impossible. The doctors had doubted my legs would ever regain strength, but here I was, moving forward, step by tentative step. The feel of pebbles under my feet, once a trivial detail, now overwhelmed me with a sense of victory. "Your progress is nothing short of remarkable," my doctor had said, underscoring my journey towards healing and empowerment. During a recent visit, my voice was tinged with genuine astonishment, a stark contrast to the cautious optimism I displayed in the early days of my rehabilitation. Reconnecting with my friends has been incredibly vital. Their steadfast support serves as a constant reminder that I am not alone in this journey. "We're here for you no matter what," they reassure me, their words soothing the wounds left by betrayal. Rowan, the man I once believed would stand by me through thick and thin, has now become a distant, almost pitiful figure. After losing the financial gain he so eagerly anticipated, he barely manages to get by. His frequent calls and apologies are desperate attempts to regain a place in my life. "Can't we just put all this behind us and start fresh?" he pleads, his voice a mix of desperation and hope. I can't help but laugh, a sound rich with scorn and liberation. "Start fresh with you?" I respond, my voice steady and confident. "That's a chapter of my life I've happily closed. You're just a footnote now." The flowers he sends in a pathetic attempt at reconciliation go straight to the trash. "You think a few roses can erase betrayal?" I scoff, tossing them aside effortlessly. They remind me of what I've overcome, not of what I've lost. In navigating this new normal, I've discovered a passion I never knew I had: painting. It has become my sanctuary, a way to express the whirlwind of emotions accompanying my journey. An easel and a set of paints are now my most cherished possessions, allowing me to immortalize memories of my parents and capture the beauty of the world around me. "This is how I heal," I explain to anyone who asks. "My brushstrokes are a testament to my resilience. My transformation isn't just physical, it's a rebirth of my spirit. They thought they could break me, but I'm stronger than I've ever been," I declare with newfound determination. My story, once overshadowed by the actions of those who sought to exploit me, is now a narrative of triumph, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, there is light to be found. This chapter of my life, born from pain and betrayal, is defined by growth, resilience, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a new beginning. I am not the same person I was before. I am stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever comes next with grace and courage. My name is Sophia, a 35-year-old woman who once cherished the idea of fairy tale endings. For years ago, my life veered in an unexpected direction when I encountered Lincoln, the man who would later become my husband. This narrative unfolds our tale, a saga woven with love, trust, and an eventual betrayal amidst what seemed like an idyllic union. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when destiny steered me to the corner cafe, clutching a John Grisham novel. Engrossed in the maze of legal thrillers, I was oblivious to my surroundings until Lincoln walked in. His presence was immediately striking, a blend of confidence and an inviting warmth radiated from his smile. "Hey, "Is that Grisham's latest?" he inquired, nodding towards my book. His voice carried a friendly tone, laced with genuine interest. "Yeah, just started it." "He never disappoints," I replied, pleasantly surprised by how naturally our conversation unfolded. We soon found ourselves deep in discussion about our favorite authors, our exchange flowing seamlessly. Lincoln's wit and charm were irresistibly endearing, and as the hours passed, it felt more like a reunion of old friends than a chat between two strangers. In the weeks that followed, our bond deepened. We discovered a shared passion for music, especially classic jazz, and a mutual enjoyment in exploring quaint bookstores scattered throughout the city. Lincoln was charming, respectful, and attentive, making each date something I looked forward to with great anticipation. One evening, as we strolled along the riverbank, Lincoln's demeanor grew earnest. "Sophia, I've never felt this way before. I think I'm falling for you," he confessed under the soft glow of the street lamps. His words ignited a surge of warmth within me. "I feel the same, Lincoln. You're unlike anyone I've ever met," I admitted, my heart fluttering with excitement and a touch of apprehension. 7 months swiftly passed, and our relationship only strengthened. It was during a cozy dinner at my apartment when Lincoln proposed. The moment was understated, yet profoundly sincere. I didn't hesitate in my response. I loved him, and I believed wholeheartedly in our future together. However, the joy of our engagement soon mingled with unease as the time approached to meet Lincoln's parents. His mother, Maya, was a stern woman with piercing eyes that scrutinized my every move, while his father appeared more amiable, yet carried a grave demeanor, especially regarding marriage. During a formal dinner at their home, Lincoln's father broached the subject of a prenuptial agreement. "It's just practical," he stated matter-of-factly. The suggestion took me aback, casting a shadow over our forthcoming nuptials and challenging the trust and simplicity that had defined our relationship up to that point. Despite my previous experiences with a cheating ex-boyfriend, I recognized the need for a prenuptial agreement, though I proposed a unique condition to ensure our mutual fidelity. If either of us cheats, the cheater owes the other $120,000, I stated, firming my voice to convey my seriousness. Lincoln looked at me with a blend of surprise and admiration. "Sophia, I promise you, I would never cheat on you," he assured me earnestly. I wanted to trust him completely, to believe that my heart was finally secure with someone who valued it as much as I did. Our wedding day was a picturesque celebration, brimming with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt vows of eternal love. The initial year of our marriage was like a dream come true. We journeyed to enchanting destinations, cherished our quiet evenings at home, and wholeheartedly supported each other's aspirations. Lincoln wasn't just my spouse. He was my best friend, my confidant. After the exuberant festivities of our wedding, we effortlessly settled into marital life, which felt surprisingly natural. Our first year together was a blissful bubble of joy, seemingly impervious to external troubles. Our honeymoon in Venice was magical. As we strolled along the Santa Elena, absorbed in our love, I marveled at our surroundings. "Can you believe we're here?" I asked Lincoln one evening, as the Eiffel Tower dazzled with lights. He drew me close and whispered, "With you, I can believe in anything." "This is just the beginning for us, Sophia." Those days were saturated with joy, romantic dinners, and promises of a shared future. We returned home with our hearts and suitcase full of unforgettable memories and a bond that seemed indestructible. Back in the rhythm of everyday life, our routine was comforting and filled with affection. Lincoln would kiss me goodbye each morning before work, and I would eagerly await his return, dinner ready, eager to share our day's stories. Our chats would stretch late into the night, filled with everything and nothing. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, Lincoln confessed, I never thought I'd be this happy doing mundane stuff like washing dishes." I playfully splashed some water on him. "That's because you've got an amazing wife." "It's all about good company," I retorted. He caught the water with his hands, laughing. "Absolutely. The best decision of my life was marrying you." Despite our bliss, external pressures began to intrude, particularly the expectations to start a family. At family gatherings, Lincoln's mother, Maya, often dropped not-so-subtle hints. "So, when are we going to hear some good news?" Maya would ask during one Sunday lunch, her tone heavy with expectation. I tried to deflect with humor. "Oh, you'll be the first to know when there's news." However, her persistence intensified over time, putting a strain on me. Lincoln saw the tension it caused and reassured me, "Don't let my mom get to you. We'll start a family when we're both ready." His support was comforting, yet the pressure from others was a looming challenge we had yet to navigate fully. Despite these challenges, our first year of marriage was truly magical. We celebrated our first anniversary with a simple, intimate dinner at home. Lincoln presented me with a necklace I had admired months earlier, making the evening even more special. "Happy anniversary, Sophia. Here's to many more years of happiness," he said, his eyes gleaming with love. Overwhelmed with emotion, I thanked him, feeling incredibly grateful for such a thoughtful partner. That night, as we cuddled on the couch, I felt a profound sense of fortune. I had a loving husband, a cozy home, and a future that looked promising. Yet, as we ventured into our second year together, the pressure from Lincoln's family, particularly his mother Maya, began to weigh heavily on me. It wasn't just about when we would start a family anymore. Maya's criticisms infiltrated every part of our lives. She had a knack for cloaking her disapproval with seemingly helpful comments, making each of her visits an ordeal for me. One afternoon, as I set the table for lunch, Maya entered the kitchen and surveyed the setup with a disapproving frown. "Is this what you're serving? A bit simple, don't you think?" she remarked, her voice laden with disdain. I clenched my jaw, trying to remain calm. "I thought we'd enjoy something light today," I replied. She just sniffed, muttering under her breath about proper meals and good housekeeping. Her critiques didn't stop at my cooking. She found fault in everything, from the way I decorated our home to how I spent my free time. Nothing was beyond her critical reach. One evening, while Lincoln and I relaxed in the living room, Maya took it upon herself to offer her unsolicited advice. "You know, Sophia, if Lincoln gave me the money he spends on you, I could hire a proper cleaner and a cook," she said. Lincoln looked uncomfortable but remained silent, his lack of defense feeling like a betrayal. I was seething but managed to respond, "Well, Maya, I'm doing my best here." What hurt the most was noticing a shift in Lincoln's attitude. He began to subtly echo his mother's criticisms. After one of Maya's visits, he casually mentioned, "Mom might have a point about the house. Maybe we should consider getting some help." I felt a pang of hurt and frustration. "So, you think I can't handle it either?" I asked. "No, that's not what I meant." He quickly backpedaled, but the damage was done. The constant criticisms and Lincoln's growing detachment were putting a strain on our marriage. We started to argue over trivial matters, our once effortless conversations turning into tense exchanges. After a particularly heated argument, I found myself questioning aloud, "What happened to us, Lincoln? We used to be on the same team." He ran a hand through his hair, looking just as frustrated. "I don't know, Sophia. Everything just feels so complicated now." I went to bed that night feeling lonely and misunderstood. Maya's insidious comments had not only invaded our home, but were now chipping away at the foundation of our marriage. As the fourth year of our marriage unfolded, a sense of unease started to take root in my heart. The vibrant flame of our love, once so bright and hopeful, began to flicker under the shadows of doubt and mistrust. It all began with a phone call, or rather, several of them. A name kept appearing on Lincoln's phone, Brian. I couldn't help but notice the shift in Lincoln's demeanor whenever that name showed up on his screen. One evening, while we were watching TV, his phone rang again, Brian. Lincoln hastily silenced it and tucked the phone away, but not before casting a nervous glance in my direction. "Who's Brian?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but inside, my heart was racing. "Oh, just a new guy at work." "No one important," Lincoln replied. His voice was too nonchalant, his answer too rehearsed. Following that, Lincoln's behavior started to change noticeably. He began returning home late, his excuses flimsy and inconsistent. Even his wardrobe transformed, from casual to meticulously tailored suits. Working late again, I questioned one night as he dressed up, ready to leave. "Yeah, a big project," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Don't wait up." My frustration and suspicion reached a tipping point when, on another late evening, I confronted him as he was about to leave. "This isn't like you, Lincoln. What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Lincoln sighed, his face a mixture of guilt and irritation. "I told you it's just work. Why can't you trust me?" "Because you're hiding something. You're never here, and even when you are, it feels like you're a million miles away," I retorted, tears stinging my eyes. Lincoln didn't reply. He simply grabbed his coat and left, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. That night, as I lay in our empty bed, I made a decision. I couldn't continue living in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. The next morning, I called a private detective. It felt like a betrayal, but the constant worry and uncertainty were consuming me. I needed answers, and I was determined to get them, no matter what they might reveal about the man I thought I knew. The days following my contact with the private detective were filled with anxiety and anticipation. I felt as if I was walking on a tightrope, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while my world was quietly crumbling around me. Then the call came, and with it, the destruction of my last hope. "Mrs. Johnson, we have conclusive evidence." "I'm afraid your suspicions were correct." The detective's solemn voice came through the phone, heavy with the weight of the news he was about to deliver. He explained that Lincoln had been having an affair. The mysterious Brian on his phone was actually a woman. My heart sank as he detailed their meetings, providing timestamps and photos. It was irrefutable evidence. Sitting there, phone in hand, I felt a devastating mix of devastation and vindication. My worst fears were no longer just fears. They were the painful reality. These were cold, hard facts. Despite the sting of betrayal, I decided against confronting Lincoln immediately. I needed to grasp the full scope of his deceit, to understand just how deep his betrayal ran. One evening, as I passed by his home office, I overheard a conversation that sent a chill through me. Lincoln was speaking with his mother, Maya. "Mom, I'm planning to end it with Sophia after your birthday," Lincoln said, his voice chillingly devoid of the affection he once professed for me. "Oh, that's wise, dear. Make sure she gets me a nice 68th birthday present before you drop the bomb," Maya replied, her voice dripping with a cold pragmatism that took my breath away. Leaning against the wall, nausea washed over me. Not only was my husband unfaithful, but he and his mother were also conspiring against me, planning to use me for one last lavish gift before casting me aside. Fueled by a concoction of anger and resolve, I decided to play along. Outwardly, I acted as if nothing was amiss, all the while secretly gathering more damning evidence of Lincoln's infidelity. The detective supplied me with photos, videos, and even audio recordings. I was building my case, preparing for the moment I could strike back. As I lay in bed each night beside the man who betrayed me, a plan began to form. I would bide my time until after Maya's birthday. I would give them the illusion of victory and let them think they had outsmarted me, but when they least expected it, I would reveal everything and turn the tables. As Maya's 68th birthday approached, I maintained a facade of ignorance, acting as though everything was normal. Inside, however, I was a cauldron of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a fierce determination to see my plan through. A few days before the celebration, Maya casually mentioned her expectations for the event during a family dinner. "So, Sophia, I'm expecting a grand 68th birthday. You must have planned something special for me," she said, her smile sly, clearly anticipating a lavish gift. Keeping my emotions in check, I replied with feigned enthusiasm, "Of course, Maya. I've arranged a dinner at the city's most luxurious restaurant. It'll be a night to remember." Her eyes sparkled with glee, oblivious to the trap I was setting. "Oh, how wonderful. I can't wait. Just a small family gathering, right?" "Yes, Very intimate and exclusive, just for close family, I confirmed, my words laced with hidden irony. Later that night, Lincoln approached me, a hint of suspicion in his voice. That's quite a generous plan for Mom's birthday. Are you sure about this? I looked at him, maintaining my composure. Absolutely. It's a significant birthday, and I want to do something special for her. Lincoln seemed appeased, but I could tell he was puzzled by my willingness to indulge his mother. As the day of the dinner drew near, I took care of the final arrangements. I confirmed the booking in Maya's name, rechecked the guest list, and made sure everything was set for the grand evening. I was playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, but beneath the facade, I was a woman on a mission, poised for retribution. As the night before Maya's 68th birthday dinner unfolded, I lay in bed enveloped in a complex cocktail of emotions. There was a twisted sense of satisfaction swirling within me. I was mere hours from turning the tables on Lincoln and Maya. They had believed they were manipulating me for one last advantage before casting me aside. Little did they know I had taken control of the game. The evening of the celebration arrived, set in a sumptuously decorated restaurant, each detail curated to exude grandeur and luxury. As Maya soaked in the opulence, I maintained the role of the gracious daughter-in-law, my inner turmoil masked by a well-practiced smile. As the dinner neared its conclusion, the waiter presented a bill amounting to $6,000. With a calm demeanor, I reached for my card, my heart thrumming with anticipation. After making the payment, I caught Maya's satisfied smirk and Lincoln's expression of unease across the table. Thank you for such a wonderful evening, Sophia. This is truly generous, Maya cooed, her voice dripping with feigned gratitude. It was then that Lincoln leaned in, his voice tinged with cold mockery. By the way, Sophia, I want a divorce, he announced. The words struck like a physical blow, but I masked my pain, maintaining my composure. Maya, seizing the opportunity, added sharply, Well then, I guess you should leave. This is a family gathering, after all. Without a word, I stood and exited the restaurant, my dignity intact despite the inner chaos. As I walked away, I discreetly pulled out my phone and canceled the payment for the dinner. A few more taps and I blocked the shared account, ensuring Lincoln could not cover the costs either. Back at home, I hastily packed my belongings, the reality of my final action sinking in. I was closing this painful chapter of my life, ready to step into an uncertain but hopeful future. My phone soon erupted with frantic calls. I answered to find Maya's voice, shrill with rage and panic. The payment didn't go through, and the restaurant staff called the police. What have you done? She demanded, her words a tumult of anger and disbelief. I remained silent, letting her tirade wash over me. This was the consequence of their deceit and manipulation, now haunting them. After hanging up, I surveyed the now empty house, a place that once brimmed with dreams and love, now just a hollow shell. I took a deep breath, stepped out the door, and never looked back. Their desperate pleas for help continued, but I no longer felt any obligation to respond. I had made my move, exposed their deceit, and now it was time for me to rebuild, away from the lies and pain that had overshadowed my life for too long. After leaving my marital home, I spent a restless night at a friend's house, my mind busy with planning my next steps. The morning sun brought clarity and renewed determination. It was time for the final confrontation. I arrived at the house to face Lincoln and Maya, their expressions a turbulent mix of anger and confusion. Clutching the divorce papers and proof of Lincoln's infidelity, I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. Maya was the first to speak, her tone laden with scorn. So, you've come crawling back after embarrassing us like that? I met her gaze steadfastly. I'm not here to crawl. I'm here for a divorce, I declared firmly. Lincoln, who had so casually announced our divorce just a day before, suddenly seemed eager to salvage the situation. Sophia, can't we talk about this? It was a mistake, he pleaded. I cut him off, holding up the evidence. Save it, Lincoln. Your mistake was ongoing and well documented. Maya scoffed, attempting to wrest back control. You think you can just walk away and leave us with nothing? You're nothing without us, she taunted. I placed the divorce papers on the table. Actually, it's you who will be leaving me with something. According to our prenup, Lincoln owes me $120,000 for his infidelity. The color drained from Lincoln's face, and Maya's eyes widened in shock as they scrambled to respond. Feeling a weight lift off my shoulders, I knew this was it. The end of the lies, the deceit, and the pain. You can try to fight this, but the evidence is clear. I suggest you pay up and move on, I stated, my voice unwavering. Lincoln looked defeated, and Maya, typically brash and controlling, was now speechless. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, the door closing behind me with a finality that resonated like freedom. The subsequent calls and pleas from them fell on deaf ears. I had definitively closed that painful chapter of my life. In the end, they paid. Lincoln had to borrow from his parents, but the source of the money was immaterial to me. It was a modest compensation for the betrayal, but more importantly, it represented closure. As I sat in the lawyer's office signing the last of the papers, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The journey had been harrowing, filled with betrayal and heartache, but I had emerged stronger and more resilient. Stepping out into the sunlight, I felt liberated, ready to begin anew. The future was uncertain, yet it was mine to shape. After all the darkness, I finally felt like I was stepping into the light, ready to embrace whatever came next with a renewed spirit and a heart open to new beginnings. Ever since Elena's arrival, the dynamics of our household have dramatically shifted. Luke, whose face used to light up whenever I entered a room, now barely acknowledges me with a grunt, choosing instead to immerse himself in his phone. His job hasn't changed much. It's as demanding, or perhaps less so, than it used to be. Yet, something within him seemed to disconnect the day we brought Elena home. Another painting today, Hazel? That must be your third this week, Luke would remark, his voice sharp and tinged with disapproval, whenever he saw me setting up my easel. There was a time when he admired my art, even proudly displaying my favorite piece in his office. Those days are gone. Yeah, it's not like I'm using your money, I'd reply, attempting to mask the quiver in my voice as I focused on blending blues and yellows on my palette. But inside, each dismissive word from him felt like a blow. Could have fooled me. Look at this place. It's like a tornado hit it, he'd say, scanning the room, his gaze critiquing every misplaced toy and blanket as if they were evidence of my shortcomings. Look, I'm with Elena all day, and she's a handful, I'd counter, my voice less steady than I'd like. Maybe if you helped out a bit around here. Help with what? You're home all the time, you handle it. That was our deal, remember? I make the money, you manage everything else. Not my fault you can't keep up, he'd retort, cutting off any possibility of discussion, leaving no room for my rebuttal. Each evening ended the same, him turning away, dismissing me with a scoff. In the mornings, when he left for work, Elena would tug at the hem of my shirt, her little eyes filled with confusion. Daddy mad? She'd ask, her tiny lips trembling. No, baby, Daddy just has a lot on his mind. Here, help Mommy choose the colors, I'd say, pulling her into my arms and trying to muster a smile, guiding her hand to pick out colors. As we painted together, the harshness in Luke's tone would fade, replaced by her laughter and our shared canvas of colors. My confidence in my paintings wasn't born from arrogance, but from a reminder of a time when I felt vibrant and assured. That evening, as I always did, I tried to welcome Luke home with a warm dinner, the house tidy and Elena squeaky clean from her bath, dressed in her best pajamas. Hey, I greeted him, the aroma of roast chicken wafting through the air. He responded with a grunt, shrugged off his coat, and threw it over the couch. His gaze flickered to the easel in the corner of our living room. Still haven't gotten rid of that junk, huh? It's not junk, Luke. I'm working on something, I replied, weariness seeping through my words. Looks like a waste of time and money. You could be doing something productive, he remarked, dismissing my words as he walked past me to the fridge. I am doing something productive. I'm raising our daughter and keeping our home, and I'm trying to hang on to something that matters to me, I stated firmly, clinging to the threads of something that once brought me joy and a sense of self-worth. My artwork is profoundly important to me. However, Luke hardly seemed to notice as he casually cracked open a beer and took a long sip. Call it whatever you want, Hazel, but to me, it seems like you're just passing the time and making a mess that I'll have to pay someone to clean up. The hurt wasn't from the harshness of his words. I was becoming accustomed to those. It was his blatant disregard for my dreams, my passion for painting, that cut deeply. There was no room for my aspirations in Luke's world anymore. Dinner's ready, I announced, a statement that felt more like a rehearsed line I delivered weekly. As I served the dinner with trembling hands, Luke's parents, who were seated at the head of the table like judges, hardly acknowledged my effort to prepare a warm, hearty meal. Their attention was fixed on the easel beside the window. What's this then? Luke's father, Jackson, a robust man with a commanding voice, pointed at my unfinished painting. Oh, that's just something Hazel has been tinkering with, Luke replied with a dismissive chuckle, waving his hand as he took a seat. Real high-class stuff, right? Laughter erupted around the table, the kind that felt mocking and hollow, failing to reach their eyes. Oh my, we have an artist now, do we? Luke's mother, Delilah, chimed in, her tone sharp enough to cut through steel. Why don't you show us your latest masterpiece, dear? Jackson added, his smile more of a challenge than a show of interest. Rooted to the spot, I felt heat creeping up my neck. It's not done yet, I mumbled. But Luke was already at the canvas, handling it with less care than a dish towel. Look at this, folks, he laughed, turning the canvas around as if he were a game show host revealing a prize. It's supposed to be a landscape. Can you believe it? Jackson's loud laughter filled the room again. Looks like a blind dog's nightmare, Delilah remarked dismissively, her nostrils flaring with disdain. Why waste your time with this hobby? Get a job, or do something productive. As if anyone would hire her, Luke sneered, placing the painting back with a thud that made my heart sink. The job market's tough out there, and well, look at her. I swallowed hard, my hands balling into fists at my sides. I do plenty. I take care of Elena and this house, I began, but my words faltered under their collective stare. Delilah prodded her food with her fork as though she suspected it was poisoned. Taking care of your family is the least you can do, she sniffed. But honestly, Luke, if you'd married someone with a little ambition, they continued to belittle me with every word while I just stood there. The room felt like it was closing in, their words pressing on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I felt myself becoming smaller, insignificant in their grand performance. Something in me snapped as soon as the meal ended. With a forced calmness in my voice, I excused myself, marched up the stairs without looking back, and locked myself in the bedroom. Hazel, Luke's voice reached me about half an hour later, filtering through the door. You coming back down? We need to clear the table. I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, the floodgates of my pent-up emotions would surely open as well. A cry or weeping might have escaped, but I refused to give them that pleasure. I was browsing through my banking app, my brow furrowing more with each passing moment. Our financial situation was dire once again this month, and the list of groceries and essentials wasn't getting any shorter. Elena, ever growing, needed new shoes. From the living room, Luke's voice broke the silence. Hazel, why is there a $57.100 charge for Martin's art supplies? I was busy on the app, transferring the last of my personal savings to cover the costs. Just picked up a few necessities, I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Come on, Hazel. That's money that could have been used for something important, he retorted, his tone flat, tinged with disinterest and perhaps disappointment or frustration. I sighed deeply. Art is important to me, Luke, just like your golf is to you. I didn't mention how his golf clubs had cost more than a year's worth of my art supplies. Yeah, but golf is networking. It's part of my job. What does your painting get us? A cluttered house and wasted cash, he grumbled. It helps me cope with the day, I murmured, feeling the familiar pull of conflict within me. Through the day, we need to be smart about our finances, not just spend on whatever helps us get by. Budget, Hazel, budget, he lectured, as if the word was a leash tightening around my neck. I buy my art supplies with my own money, Luke. The money I had before. I trailed off, not wanting to escalate the argument. My past, a time of job independence and dreams of my own gallery, felt like a distant chapter. Your money's our money, isn't it? He snapped, the implication clear that my financial independence was a thing of the past. And that money is running out fast. What then? Later at the store, I opted for cheaper brands, counting every penny, every compromise. At the checkout, I chose the smallest paint tubes, small enough to go unnoticed in the cart. Back home, I unpacked groceries with methodical precision, each item a symbol of our precarious financial balance. Luke, noticing the budget brands, remarked, "Putting back some luxuries, are we?" "Yes," tightening the belt, I responded, avoiding his gaze and concealing the receipts, a record of my necessary transgressions. He hummed, rummaging through the bags as if searching for a mistake. "Where are the Greek yogurts you like, and isn't this the cheaper coffee?" I shrugged, busying myself with the pantry. "Prices went up. Had to make some cuts. But I don't see any cuts in your art budget," he pointed out, noticing the new brushes hidden under a loaf of bread. I faced him, our eyes meeting for the first time since the conversation began.
This keeps me sane, Luke. My art keeps me going.
A plaything in her curious hands. "Her birthday is coming up fast, and Daddy wants us to make something special. Can I help?" Alina's eyes sparkle with the prospect of a shared project, even as I weigh the feasibility against the looming deadline. I nod, swallowing back my apprehension. "Of course, honey. We'll make it a team effort." With my resolve steadied, I reclaim my voice, now steady and resolute, as I grip the edge of the countertop, halting the trembling in my hand. In these trying times, maintaining one's composure feels almost like a privilege. His words echoed in my mind as he gestured toward the brushes, a stark reminder of our strained conversations. That evening, as I began to paint, it wasn't inspiration that guided me but sheer determination. Each brushstroke became a rebellion against the stifling expectations set by Luke. Yet, as I worked, memories of a time when these brushes brought joy instead of strife flooded back to me. Meanwhile, Luke was entangled in business meetings across the country, barely pausing as he laid out my latest assignment over the phone. "Hazel, you need to come up with a birthday gift for my boss's wife, Hannah. Her celebration is in a week."
Got it.
"Do we have a budget for this?" I asked, my gaze fixed on our stretched finances displayed on my laptop. "Just handle it. Make it thoughtful," he replied distractedly, his attention already elsewhere. Exasperated yet undeterred, I felt the familiar rush of frustration heat my cheeks. "You expect a thoughtful gift, yet I'm to conjure the budget from thin air?" I muttered to myself after he hung up. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes, calming the storm within. Without the funds but needing to impress, I dove deep into Hannah's social media. Her love for art was evident, her feed a parade of gallery visits and luxurious canvases, interspersed with snapshots alongside celebrated artists. She valued the arts profoundly. An idea struck me like a flash of lightning. I could create a painting. The supplies were here. The motivation was undeniable. It would be a gift uniquely ours, impossible to replicate from any upscale boutique. Embracing the concept, I envisioned the painting coming to life, the strokes forming under my fingers. This personal touch was not just fitting, it was necessary. With resolve, I prepared to use every available moment to create something worthy of Hannah's sophisticated tastes. Setting up my old easel in the living room, transforming it into my studio, I braced myself for the challenge ahead. As I began, my daughter, Elena, stumbled upon the scene of artistic disarray. "What's all this?" she inquired, eyes wide with wonder. "It's a birthday present project for someone your daddy works with," I explained, tidying up as she poked at a hardened paintbrush. "Can I help, Mommy?" she asked, picking up the crusty brush, intrigued. Yes, let's make it special together, I agreed, taking the brush from her, hopeful that our combined creativity could meet the high stakes of this corporate gifting challenge. Elena, gripping a makeshift wand or toy sword, furrowed her brow in confusion. But why can't Daddy buy something, she asked. Elena, go watch your cartoons. I need some time to think, I replied, not in the mood to explain our financial struggles or the complexities of my marriage to a 7-year-old. Muttering under her breath, a bit too much like me for comfort, she scampered off to the living room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The days wore on as I juggled my roles: daytime mother, nighttime artist. The canvas slowly came to life, evolving into an abstract reflection of the chaotic whirlwind that had become my life. Throughout the week, Luke remained distant. No calls, no texts, nothing. He was too engrossed in his own world of charts and deals, too busy to check in. Meanwhile, Elena, my little shadow, often returned to watch me paint. You're really good, Mommy, she declared around day 4. You should draw more. Her words warmed my heart, possibly the kindest critique I would ever receive. Maybe I will, I thought, encouraged. On the eve of the big reveal, the painting was complete, a raw outpouring of everything I hadn't been able to express. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind racing with worries about the reception of my work. What if Hannah dislikes it? What if Luke thinks I've wasted my time? The morning dawned clear and bright. I wrapped the painting in plain brown parcel paper, securing it with a bow made from one of Elena's hair ribbons. Why not add a personal touch? Holding the package close, I attended the boss's wife's birthday celebration, hoping my artwork would be well received. As I navigated through the crowd, my eyes low, I wished I could vanish into the background. Luke was there, freshly returned from a business trip, exuding success. His gaze swept over the polished, elegantly dressed women, then landed heavily on me. His expression soured as if he'd just bitten into a lemon. He scrutinized me, a silent judgment only I perceived, as the party's noise seemed to dim around us. His attention then shifted to the package in my hands. His eyes narrowed. Oh, that familiar pre-storm glare. What's that? He demanded, his voice barely contained. It's a gift. My painting, I responded, clutching the package tighter, wishing it could shield me from the impending confrontation. A painting? You're kidding, right? His voice rose, drawing a few curious glances our way. I tried to silence him with my eyes, but he was beyond caring. You actually think it's appropriate to give her this amateur piece? The whispers around us grew, like the beginning of a rainstorm. Luke, please, not here, I pleaded, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Did you lose your mind? He roared. The room didn't just pause, it froze. His words, sharp and loud, made it clear. He thought I was making us look foolish. This was more than just a moment of embarrassment. It was a glaring revelation of our deep-seated issues, laid bare for all to see. Suddenly, we were the center of attention. Eyes darted our way, then away, and back again, as if they were spectators at a tennis match. I felt myself shrinking, wishing I could just dissolve into the floor. His face turned a shade of red I had only seen on stoplights. Great, just great. Hazel, he exploded, throwing his hands up in frustration. You don't think, do you? The heat rushing to my cheeks was far from flattering. My hands trembled, but I clung to the painting tighter, it being my only anchor. Taking a deep breath, I tried to recall why this had seemed like a good idea in the first place. Now everyone's going to criticize us, thanks to your foolish plan, he snapped, his words cutting through the air for all the eavesdroppers. I wanted to respond, perhaps even tell him off, but with the entire room's gaze piercing through us, I stood frozen, silently cursing the situation. The room erupted in laughter following Luke's outburst, each chuckle stabbing at me. Despite the room swirling around me, I caught the boss's eye. His expression mingled confusion with curiosity. His wife, Hannah, looked on, her expression a mix of concern and fascination, which oddly gave me a glimmer of hope. With a commanding wave of her hand, she silenced the room. Let's see what Hazel has for us, she declared. I moved as if on autopilot, my hands still shaking as I unwrapped the canvas, revealing the artwork I had poured my soul into. Hannah's eyebrows arched in surprise. "Oh my," she murmured, and the room fell silent, anticipating her verdict. "This is quite something, Hazel," she continued. Luke, still simmering beside me, muttered, "Yeah, something all right." Ignoring him, I searched Hannah's face for a sign. It's for you," I stammered. "Happy birthday." She studied the painting, her head tilted. "It's bold. I like bold, don't you, darling?" She nudged her husband, who was difficult to read but nodded in agreement. "You don't see something like this every day." Luke attempted to regain control. "Oh, come on. You're saying you like this mess?" But Hannah snapped back with a sharpness that stopped him in his tracks. "Luke, I'd watch it if I were you. Your wife has talent, and I won't have you embarrass her further. It's unbecoming." The room dropped into a tense silence, the kind so thick you could hear a pin drop blocks away. "Look at the colors, the life in it," Hannah continued, her voice softer now. Luke tried to interject. "Well, sure, if you like that sort of thing." But Hannah cut him off. "I do. It's decided. This goes right in the foyer." I blinked, stunned. "Are you sure?" The boss chimed in, hesitant. "It's not exactly." Hannah shot him a look that made him falter. "Standard, right? It's unique." Her arm reached out to me, a gesture of solidarity. "Thank you, Hazel. This here's a real gift. It's got soul." And just like that, the room buzzed with chatter once more. However, the atmosphere had changed. People were now nodding in agreement, some even regarding me with what appeared to be admiration. Hannah, cradling my painting as if it were a precious artifact, turned her gaze towards me once more. "So, Hazel," she began, drawing the room's attention, "have you ever considered exhibiting your art in a gallery?" Luke scoffed audibly. I heard it, but my attention was fixed on Hannah. "Nah, who'd be interested in my art?" I dismissed. "Don't worry, Hazel. I would, and I know others who would too," Hannah replied confidently, her eyes sharp and persuasive. Luke attempted to brush it off with a laugh. "Come on, Hannah. She's just experimenting." Hannah raised an eyebrow at him. "Well, she experiments better than some established professionals I know. What's it to you?" I felt a wave of anxiety, standing on the brink of something monumental. I don't know. I've never really thought about it. What's there to think about? Just dive in. I'll support you, Hannah declared, her expression making it clear this wasn't a suggestion but a directive. A nervous giggle escaped me, sounding slightly hysterical even to my own ears. "Sure, right?" I agreed, and Hannah's face lit up with a smile. "Good, it's settled then." Following our exchange, whispers circulated around me like moths drawn to a flame. Individuals who had previously overlooked me were now eagerly discussing my art, clinging to me as if seeing me for the first time. It felt surreal, like I was navigating through someone else's life. Luke reappeared, his hand pressing almost painfully on my back. "You're not serious about this, are you?" His voice had a sharp edge, like a knife poised to slice. I faced him, feeling the collective gaze and the allure of a new path. "Yes, I am," I said, my voice resonating with newfound strength. He scrutinized me intently, as if truly seeing me for the first time that evening. "But what about us?" he questioned. "What about us, Luke?" I echoed. We had been disconnected far longer than I cared to admit. That seemed to jolt him. He stepped back, confused. "I thought we were fine." I faced him squarely, my tone more frigid than intended but necessary. "You thought wrong." Luke ran his hand through his hair, defeated. "So, what? We just ended." I glanced down at the colorful paint splattered across my nails, at the rings that had lost their significance. "We ended it a long time ago, Luke. Now we're just acknowledging it." He had no response to that. I watched him walk away, his shoulders slumped. Hannah touched my shoulder gently. "You okay, hon?" I nodded. "I am. Thanks to you." She winked. "What are friends for, right? And you, Hazel," she continued, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You're going to make this town take notice with your art." Just wait and see. With that, a rush of excitement surged through me, not just for an ending but for a new beginning, painted in the most vibrant colors I could envision. Elena and I, we'd be more than just okay. We'd be boldly, unwaveringly us. I've always valued forging my path, so living alone in the vibrant heart of the city, a mere stone's throw from the book publishing company where I work as an editor, suits me perfectly. While my parents are always just a phone call away, the responsibility of city life falls solely on my shoulders. One Saturday, craving a break from the norm, I decided to trade in manuscripts for some fresh air and headed to my favorite park. It's a peaceful place I usually find solace in. That day, deep in thought, perhaps too deep, I failed to notice the bicycle path up ahead until a voice urgently warned, "Watch out." I stepped back just in time as a cyclist came to a screeching halt right where I would have been moments later. "Jesus, lady, you trying to get yourself killed," he exclaimed, catching his breath. He seemed annoyed yet relieved there was no collision. Apologetically, I admitted, "I'm so sorry. I wasn't paying attention." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, no thanks to you." "You've got to watch where you're going," he replied, his tone harsh, yet laced with genuine concern. Acknowledging my mistake, I thanked him for his quick reflexes. After a moment, he relaxed slightly and suggested, "All right, no harm done, I guess. But maybe keep off the bike lane, huh?" "Deal," I responded with a small smile, introducing myself. "I'm Elizabeth, by the way." "Gregory," he replied, extending his hand, which I shook. "So, Elizabeth, always this distracted, or is it just my lucky day?" "Only on Saturdays," I quipped, feeling more comfortable. We both laughed, and that awkward beginning morphed into coffee at a nearby cafe. Gregory worked in car sales, direct and blunt, but amusing. We chatted about everything from books, which he rarely read, to cars, about which I knew little. The conversation flowed effortlessly, the kind where time slips by unnoticed. "I didn't think I'd end up spending my afternoon with the woman who nearly wrecked my bike," Gregory remarked as we later stood to leave. "And I didn't think I'd be thanking the guy who nearly ran me over on our first encounter," I replied with a laugh. "Well, I guess we're both full of surprises. Can I see you again, Elizabeth? Maybe on a day when you're not in the path of moving vehicles." I nodded, smiling. "I think I can arrange that." Over the next few weeks, Gregory and I began to see each other more frequently. What started as casual coffee dates and city walks, where his straightforward manner was refreshingly genuine, evolved into late-night talks and dinners at spots that quickly became our places. The more we shared, the more I was drawn to his candid charm. As our relationship deepened, it was only a matter of time before meeting his family came up. They lived in a spacious suburban home, complete with a yard. Gregory had mentioned his mother's traditional values, setting the stage for that next chapter in our unfolding story. I was not fully prepared for the reality of meeting Gregory's family. When we arrived at their home, it was evident that his parents had been eagerly anticipating our visit. His mother, a vivacious woman with a warm smile, greeted us at the door. She embraced Gregory with a hearty hug and then gave me a scrutinizing look that lingered a little too long. "Elizabeth, dear, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Gregory has told us so much about you," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that seemed more about sizing me up than welcoming me. "Thanks, Mrs. Carroll. It's great to meet you too," I responded, doing my best to mirror her warmth. We settled into the living room, and Mrs. Carroll dove right into the conversation. "So, Elizabeth, Gregory tells us you work at a publishing house. That must be quite exciting, handling books all day," she said. "It is, Mrs. Carroll. I love my job. It's rewarding to be part of the creative process," I explained, glancing at Gregory, hoping he'd help navigate the conversation. "That's nice, dear, but once you two settle down, you'll need to consider what's really important. Family should come first, And a woman's touch in the home is irreplaceable, she continued without missing a beat. Gregory's father, who had been quietly observing, nodded in agreement. Absolutely. A stable home is the foundation of a good life, right, son? He said, looking at Gregory. Gregory shifted in his seat but managed to respond. Yeah, Mom. Elizabeth's great at managing her time, though. She's pretty organized and sharp. Of course, but managing a home is different, you know. It's a full-time commitment, his mother countered, her gaze intense as if she was trying to decode me. Feeling cornered, I cleared my throat. I believe it's possible to balance both, Mrs. Carroll. I think a modern family can have 2 working parents. It's all about teamwork, isn't it? Mrs. Carroll smiled, but her eyes did not reflect the warmth of her expression. Oh dear, that's a nice thought, but in reality, children need their mother and a house needs a woman's touch, not just a quick sweep. The conversation shifted away from this point, but her words lingered. Dinner was served and it felt like navigating a minefield. Every compliment about the food seemed like a subtle hint for me to take notes. Elizabeth, do you cook often? Mrs. Carroll asked as she served a perfectly roasted chicken. Sometimes when I can. Work keeps me pretty busy, I replied, trying to keep the tone light. Ah well, you'll find great satisfaction in keeping your family fed and your house in order, she said, passing the mashed potatoes as if imparting age-old wisdom. Gregory gave me a light kick under the table, a silent signal to stay calm. I simply smiled, sipping my wine a bit more than usual, reflecting on how this dinner felt more like an interview than a meal. Despite the initial reservations from that first meeting, Gregory and I continued our relationship, and after a year, we decided to get married. Love, as they say, fills you with hope. We planned a modest wedding with close family and friends. Nothing extravagant, just the way we both wanted it. The wedding day was a joyful blur of smiles, flowers, and a small crowd of well-wishers at the local community hall we had booked. It was quaintly decorated, and there was a palpable air of excitement, perhaps just my nerves. The ceremony was brief yet poignant. We exchanged vows, rings, and a kiss that sealed our commitment. Everyone clapped, and in that moment, everything felt just right. During a reception where we were enjoying some appetizers, Gregory casually brought up the idea of us moving to a larger apartment as he nibbled on some finger food. I've been thinking about our discussion on needing more space, he mentioned. I was snacking on a celery stick and nodded in agreement. What did you find? I inquired. Gregory's eyes lit up as he shared. There's this fantastic apartment that's not only spacious, but also beautifully laid out. It's actually close to where I grew up. He observed my reaction carefully. Near your parents? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Yes, it's convenient, and my parents would love to have us nearby. Plus, my dad offered to help with the rent for a while, he added. I paused, contemplating the frequent visits from his mother that might become a routine. That's very kind, but Gregory, you know how much I value our privacy. I don't want to feel dependent, I expressed. Gregory held my hand reassuringly. I understand, Elizabeth, but financially, it's a wise decision, and having family close could be beneficial, especially if we start our own soon. I was skeptical, but agreed to consider it. We can try, but if it gets overwhelming, we'll need to rethink our decision, I said. Agreed. Gregory smiled, and we returned to hosting our friends. Moving in proved to be a challenge. The apartment was indeed roomy with a beautiful park view, but it also meant a 55-minute drive to my job, which extended my daily commute. True to their nature, Gregory's parents visited often. His mother brought housewarming presents that were more about her tastes than ours. Elizabeth, dear, these curtains will brighten up the living room, she insisted one day, holding up an elaborate floral set that clashed with our decor. Thanks, Mrs. Carroll, but I like our current ones, I responded, trying to keep the conversation light. However, she proceeded to hang them up anyway. Each visit from her felt more like an inspection than a casual drop-in, making me feel uneasy in my new home. Gregory tried to mediate, but our views on family closeness differed. As time passed, Gregory and I found ourselves debating our lifestyles more often. He favored traditional roles, suggesting, think about it, Elizabeth. You manage the home, and I handle the finances. It makes sense. He seemed convinced this was the final word. But I would counter, showing him our budget on my laptop. With the current economic situation and job market uncertainties, having two incomes is safer and more practical. Gregory would sigh, visibly frustrated, implying that family dynamics were about more than just financial stability. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carroll practically made our apartment her second home, imposing her presence and opinions on us constantly. You're not planning to stay at that job forever, are you? She would start questioning my career choices the moment she arrived. I would defend my work, which I was passionate about, trying to remain polite yet firm. She would then critique the cleanliness of our apartment, insinuating it could be better if I were home more. Frustrated, I'd reply, "It's clean enough. We live here. It's not a museum." My patience was wearing thin, as our home felt less like our own and more like a battleground for differing family ideals. However, she'd already moved on to her next critique, flinging open the refrigerator to survey my grocery choices with a frown. "This isn't enough for a healthy meal, and these leftovers, don't you cook fresh?" she complained, her expression one of clear disapproval. I tried to discuss this with Gregory. "Your mom is overstepping, and it's starting to stress me out." "I can't meet her high expectations," I confessed. Gregory, always trying to smooth things over, sighed and responded, "She's just trying to help. Elizabeth, maybe if you were home more, things wouldn't be so tense." One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I returned home to find Gregory visibly upset. "This place is a mess, Elizabeth. And this dinner," he gestured dismissively at the pasta I had quickly prepared, "it's just not good enough." I was stretched thin. "I'm doing my best, Gregory. I'm working full-time and trying to manage the house, but it seems like it's never enough for you or your mom," I retorted, my frustration peaking. "Well, maybe if you weren't trying to do both, you'd actually succeed at one," he snapped back, his words sharp and hurtful. I was stunned. "Are you saying I need to choose between my job and our home?" I asked. "If you can't handle both, then yes. Maybe you should just be a housewife. Honestly, if things don't change, I don't see how this can work out," he threatened, his tone cold and serious. A chill ran down my spine as the man I loved gave me an ultimatum that felt like a tightening noose around my neck. Be a housewife or bust. It was clear that the life I had built, my career and my independence, were slipping through my fingers as I tried to cling to it. The tension in our home was palpable, cutting through the air like a knife. Gregory and I were at a breaking point over my career and our lifestyle. Deeply in love and desperate for a resolution, I made a drastic decision to smooth things over. I went to my boss and explained that I was resigning to become a full-time housewife. My boss was shocked and disappointed. He knew how much my career meant to me. However, he then offered a lifeline. Remote work. "You can still edit, just from home," he suggested. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like a compromise I could accept without completely losing my sense of self. I didn't tell Gregory about the remote work arrangement. Instead, I told him I had quit my job to focus on our home. His face lit up in a way that both warmed and broke my heart simultaneously. "That's great, Elizabeth. It'll be better for us, you'll see," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt like he was clinging to newfound peace of mind. I embraced the role of housewife, managing the chores, cooking meals, and ensuring everything was just right for when he came home. But as soon as he left for work each morning, my laptop opened, and I was back at my editor's desk, working remotely. The balance was precarious, juggling my secret work life with the domestic life Gregory believed I had fully embraced. I funneled the money I earned into a separate account, thinking it wise to have a financial cushion that Gregory didn't know about, just in case. Living on just Gregory's salary was his idea, and it strained our finances more than he realized. Just 2 months in, the cracks began to show. "We're running low on everything, Gregory. We need to rethink our budget." I approached the topic one evening, hoping for a rational conversation. "What are you talking about? You're just not managing our money right," he retorted. Gregory's stern voice cut through the air, his frustration evident. "You need to cut back on spending," he exclaimed, his words sharp with irritation. I felt a sting of hurt. I hadn't treated myself in ages, always on the lookout for sales and saving wherever possible. I've been incredibly careful with our finances, I retorted, my voice tight, wounded by his accusation. The next morning, as if summoned, Mrs. Carroll arrived at our doorstep. Gregory mentioned you're struggling with the budget. Let me show you the right way to shop, she announced decisively, leaving no room for argument. The days that followed were an intensive lesson in extreme frugality. She took me from store to store, pointing out the least expensive products, many of questionable quality. These are what you should be buying, Elizabeth. Forget the fancy stuff, she instructed sharply, treating me more like a misbehaving child than an adult. She even taught me how to dilute dish soap to extend its use, her gaze piercing. You'll learn to manage with less. It's for the best, she stated, more to herself than to me. She scrutinized every receipt and questioned every purchase. Why this? There's no need for unnecessary trips when there's work to be done, she scolded upon seeing a bus ticket among my things. It was about more than just saving money. It felt belittling, as though I was constantly being watched. The strict regimen imposed by Gregory and enforced by his mother felt suffocating. One afternoon, overwhelmed, I locked myself in our bedroom and called my mom. Tears edged my voice as I shared how Mrs. Carroll's stringent budgeting tips made it feel like I was living through the Great Depression. That's not normal, Elizabeth, my mom responded firmly. You and Gregory are supposed to be partners. It sounds like she's taking control, and Gregory shouldn't allow it. Relief washed over me as she spoke, but it was short-lived. Suddenly, the door burst open. Gregory stood there, fury etched across his face, having overheard my conversation. Without a word, he grabbed the phone from my hand and ended the call. A wife shouldn't be complaining about her husband and his mother like some traitor, he snapped coldly. I was stunned. Gregory, I was talking to my mom. I needed someone to talk to. I tried to explain, but he was unyielding. The argument escalated quickly, voices raised, words thrown that couldn't be taken back. In a fit of anger, Gregory stormed out, slamming the door behind him. He was gone until past midnight, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts of sadness and frustration. When he finally returned, the smell of alcohol hung heavily around him. His usual stern demeanor had given way to a sloppy, cruel drunkenness. I should have listened to my mom. She warned me about marrying someone like you, he slurred, his words cutting deep. I stood up, my anger rising. Gregory, you're an adult. Stop letting your mother dictate our lives. You don't need her approval for everything. His anger flared even more at my words. If you're so unhappy, why don't you just leave? He bellowed, stepping threateningly close. It's 2 a.m., Gregory. It's not safe, I replied, my voice trembling as I tried to reason with him. I don't care. Get out, he shouted, turning away dismissively. After a brief hesitation, I started gathering my essentials, my phone and some clothes. When I reached for my wallet, Gregory snatched it away, his voice laced with venom. I earned this money, Elizabeth. You have no right to it, he declared. A wave of panic washed over me, but then I remembered my bank account, my secret backup plan. I quickly called a taxi and left without a backward glance, Gregory's angry shouts diminishing as the door shut behind me. I sought refuge in a nearby hotel, a temporary sanctuary. The next morning, I was up early, my mind buzzing with plans. My first stop was a small, unassuming lawyer's office. The lawyer, Mr. Jonathan, was perceptive and compassionate. He listened intently as I recounted my situation, nodding in sympathy. We'll get the divorce papers drawn up immediately. You have rights, Elizabeth, and we'll ensure they're respected, he promised with reassuring confidence. With the divorce papers, I returned to the apartment Gregory and I had shared. The silence of the place contrasted sharply with the chaos of the previous night, evidenced by a discarded bottle and Gregory's snoring figure on the couch. He hadn't even made it to the bedroom. I packed swiftly, clothes, books, personal items, all stuffed into boxes and bags. The act of leaving felt both freeing and somber. As I zipped up my last suitcase, Gregory stirred. Elizabeth, hey, can you grab me a beer? He mumbled, groggy and oblivious to the suitcases. Instead of a beer, I placed the divorce papers on the coffee table before him. "Here's what I can offer you," I said, my voice steady and calm. Gregory blinked, slowly coming to. He picked up the papers, scanned them, and smirked dismissively. "You're serious? Come on, Elizabeth. Just apologize to me and my mom. Promise to follow the rules, and we can forget all this." I couldn't help but let out a short, bitter laugh. "No, Gregory. I'm not coming back. Not now, not ever. This is goodbye." I left the apartment, the door clicking shut behind me, a sound that sealed my past away. That afternoon, I moved into my own small, rented apartment. Returning to full-time work at the office, I felt rejuvenated by the familiar environment, the buzz of activity, the rhythmic clacking of keyboards, the comforting aroma of brewing coffee. I loved my job, and it was good to be back. I reconnected with friends and family, repairing relationships that had frayed during my tumultuous marriage. Over long dinners and weekend brunches, I shared laughs and stories, drawing strength from these bonds that had endured much. One late afternoon, as I was finalizing a manuscript, my phone buzzed. It was Anna, a dear friend and confidant from the city. "Hey Anna, what's up?" I answered, smiling at the sound of her enthusiastic voice. "Elizabeth, I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, a few of us are meeting this weekend at that new cafe downtown. You have to come, it's been ages, and everyone's dying to see you." The cafe meetup was exactly what I needed: laughter, updates, and a gentle reintroduction to my social life. It felt wonderful to be among friends, sharing stories and enjoying the camaraderie I had missed. As the gathering wound down, Anna caught my arm, her presence a comforting reminder of the support I had. As I was heading out the door, Anna's voice stopped me. "Hey, how are you doing, Elizabeth?" Her expression was intense, yet gentle. I paused, took a deep breath, and decided to share my truth. "I'm getting there, Anna. It's been a rough patch, but I feel like I'm truly starting to move on now." A few months into adjusting to my new yet familiar life, my phone buzzed while I was engrossed in a complex manuscript. The caller ID showed it was Gregory. With a sigh, I braced myself and answered, maintaining a calm tone. "Hello, Elizabeth. I need to talk." Gregory's voice sounded tentative and strained. "What's up, Gregory?" I asked, not in the mood for small talk. "I've been fired," he blurted out. "Things are pretty bad financially. I was hoping. Do you think you could lend me some money?"
And
I pressed, already anticipating the next part of his request. He continued hesitantly, and I was thinking maybe we could start over. "If you apologize to my mom and me, maybe we could try again. You could help us out." I couldn't contain my laughter. The suggestion was absurd. "Gregory, are you joking? You expect me to apologize, support you, and return to that chaos? You've abandoned your values pretty quickly, haven't you?" The line went quiet. Finally, he asked, "So, is that a no?" "Yes, Gregory, that's a definite no," I replied, still amused by the ridiculousness of his proposal. "I'm doing well, and I'm not about to sacrifice my newfound freedom and happiness to revisit whatever that was." After hanging up, I shook my head in disbelief at the conversation. It reminded me how much I had evolved and the liberation I now felt. I turned back to my manuscript, a smile tugging at my lips. The thought of re-entering a relationship wasn't appealing at all. I was relishing my independence and the tranquility it brought too much to consider anything else. My name is Bella, and life certainly has its way of teaching you who's in charge. Not too long ago, I would have happily told you about my marriage to Willie, radiating the joy of a newlywed. I believed wholeheartedly that sacrificing my job at Birentix Tech to focus on our marriage was the right choice. After all, isn't love supposed to be worth more than money? Birentix Tech, with its unique vibe, had more regulations than you'd find in a strict regime. One rigid rule was particularly problematic for couples, and once Willie and I were married, It put us directly in the spotlight. Our boss, Gary, didn't waste time. He set us up like we were contestants on a tacky game show, delivering an ultimatum with utmost seriousness. That evening, our discussion could have rivaled a high-stakes reality TV episode. In hindsight, love might have clouded my judgment. I caved and resigned the following day, giving up a promising career in tech to focus on domestic life. If only I had the foresight I have now, but then again, isn't that the irony of life? Fast forward to today, and I find myself cleaning up cereal spills because Willie, ever the soon-to-be promoted, can't seem to aim into his breakfast bowl. Didn't your mother teach you better? I shout towards the other room, though my words seem to vanish into the walls. His reply comes tight and defensive, as if my question was an arrow aimed at him. I let it go. It wasn't worth the argument. Once upon a time, we could tease each other without care, but now every conversation feels like navigating a minefield. Hours later, Willie is absorbed by the TV on the couch, and I'm left assessing the remnants of what our relationship has become. Are we going to talk, or are you planning a lifelong commitment to that couch? His indifference was palpable, as he didn't even glance my way.
About what? He replied.
I counted to 12, hoping for patience. About us, about where this mess is heading. I pushed on. He merely shrugged a gesture that filled the room with a heavy silence while the TV babbled on in the background. That was when it struck me. Our relationship, once solid like a house of glass, now lay in shambles, hit by an unseen force. All we had built seemed to go up in smoke, and neither of us knew how to quench the flames. It's strange how quickly life can flip. One day, you're planning a future together, and the next, discussing the simplest matters feels as volatile as a battlefield. I lingered, observing him. The man on the couch seemed as distant as a random passenger on a bus. The shift from indifference to coldness was subtle but palpable, like the chill of an ending summer or the bite of an early frost. I remembered how things were once easy between us, but now every interaction felt as precarious as walking on thin ice. I knew exactly how Willie liked his steak, rare but not too bloody, seasoned with meticulous care. It was something I had perfected. But on this particular day, either the oven or my resolve faltered. As he entered the kitchen, his heavy steps forewarned me of his sour mood before he even appeared. Standing there in the doorway, he surveyed the dinner setup with a predator's intensity. Life's lessons are harsh, often teaching us through loss and change rather than gentle guidance. As I stood in the kitchen, thinking about the ease of our past and the tension of our present, I couldn't help but reflect on how swiftly and silently the fabric of a shared life can unravel. Willie tore at the steak with his bare hands, disregarding the utensils beside his plate. His eyes narrowed as he jabbed a finger toward the meat. "Is this the best you can do now?" he growled, his voice gritty like coarse sandpaper. I tread carefully in my response, aware of the tension simmering in the air. "It's slightly cooler than usual, Willie," I explained, referring to the steak's temperature. "Not what?" he interrupted sharply, his glare intensifying. I pressed my lips together, holding back the thoughts racing through my mind, knowing that speaking up would only escalate things. "Look, Bella," he continued, his tone dropping to a menacing whisper reminiscent of a predator lurking in the shadows. "When I say I want my steak hot, I expect to feel the life fading from it as I cut in." He tapped the steak dismissively with his fork, echoing a judge's gavel. "This is already dead and gone." His criticism was cold and calculated, void of any loud accusations, but laden with a venom reserved solely for me. It was our private theater of cruelty, absent of external drama, just sharp, slicing words that left me feeling hollow. He pushed the plate away, his eyes meeting mine briefly, filled with a mix of contempt and resignation. "Forget it," he muttered, turning his back to me and the uneaten food. Grabbing his keys with a harsh movement, he issued one last command. "Fix your mistakes, Bella, or next time it won't just be the dinner getting tossed out." The door slammed behind him, punctuating the end of what little joy remained in our relationship. I stood alone, staring at the closed door, the click of the lock echoing loudly in the silent apartment. I exhaled slowly, looking down at the abandoned steak, feeling as forlorn as the meal before me. Approaching the trash can felt like a defeat, each step reminding me of what I was discarding. My effort, my care, my dwindling hope of making things work. To the outside world, we were a perfect couple, lauded by his parents and our friends alike. Yet behind closed doors, the reality was starkly different. Willie's demands escalated, each one eroding my self-esteem further. My days revolved around his approval, which grew increasingly rare. Tonight, like many before, the dinner table was a battleground for his critiques. "What's this?" he asked flatly, eyeing the steamed broccoli. "Dinner," I replied, striving to keep my voice steady despite his disdain. "Broccoli again? Don't you know anything else?" he scoffed, pushing the plate away. Suppressing a retort, I offered to make something else, but his sneer was quick. "That'd be a first," he muttered. His words stung, fueling a silent anger within me. As I turned back to the kitchen, his gaze followed, critical and unyielding. "Where are you going?" he barked when I moved to start anew. "I said I'd make you something else," I responded, a hint of defiance surfacing despite my fear. Willie rose abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor.
Sit down.
"Let's not pretend you have other plans. Your world revolves around me. Remember?" His words were a harsh reminder, a verbal leash yanking me back into reality. "Yeah, I remember," I murmured, the fight draining from me as I returned to the table, each step heavier than the last. As I returned home with groceries, the silence greeted me. Not a sorry, not a thank you, just a heavy, settling silence. Willie was seated, an air of disapproval hanging about him as the evening wore on. Suddenly, he declared, "This house is a mess." His gaze swept across the room, eyeing the slightly misaligned books on the coffee table and a crooked pillow. "Clean it up," he demanded. I wanted to shout back, to tell him that a home that's lived in wouldn't meet his impossible standards of perfection, but instead, I quietly adjusted the books and the pillow, muttering under my breath about the endless work the place needed. "What was that?" he snapped, catching the tail end of my grumble. "Nothing," I replied louder, trying to sound casual, just talking to myself. He looked at me suspiciously, but dropped the subject. Later in bed, I lay awake, the darkness around us thick with all the things left unsaid and the dreams we'd both stifled. I thought about the sharp words I wished I could say, about my growing resentment, and about how the life I wanted seemed to be slipping through my fingers. We were bound, not by love, but by invisible chains of dependence and fear. They said we were perfect, but perfect was just a facade, a cheap word in the economy of our sham marriage. One ordinary day, after a trip to the store, a patch of ice changed everything. I slipped and fell hard, pain shooting through my leg like a bolt of lightning. It was undeniable. I couldn't stand it. A couple of bystanders rushed over, concerned. Trying to maintain my composure, I managed a nod when they suggested a trip to the hospital. At the emergency room, time seemed to drag as I waited for attention. When a doctor finally examined me, one look was enough for him to diagnose a broken leg. "It's broken," he stated bluntly, as if discussing the weather. The shock wasn't from the break itself, but the dread of explaining this to Willie. I texted him, "Broke my leg at the hospital," but received no response. I spent a cold, uncomfortable night in the hospital, the nurses indifferent, and the coffee stale. As soon as I could hobble, I was sent home with a stack of discharge papers and a cast as white as the snow outside. Willie was there when I arrived, his expression stormy. No words of concern or queries about what happened. His first words were, "Where's dinner?" Standing there, supported by crutches, leg encased in plaster, I lost my temper. "What do you think? I went dancing. Look at my leg." His only concern had been about dinner, not my well-being, and in that moment, the full extent of the neglect and selfishness I had been enduring crystallized painfully clearly. Willie ranted as if I had broken my leg on purpose. "You always have excuses," he accused bitterly. "Can't even do the one thing you're supposed to, can you?" I was astounded that after a harrowing night in the hospital, All he cared about was his dinner. The whole situation overwhelmed me. There I was, hurt and shaking, yet he seemed utterly indifferent. The air felt as cold as the ice I had slipped on, signaling that this was more than just a physical injury. It was a deep fracture in our relationship. Limping to the kitchen table, each step with the crutch felt like a mile. Ironically, I was still preparing dinner for my husband, as if nothing had changed. Nearby, the trash bin was nearly overflowing, a minor oversight, but with Willie, no mistake was ever minor. "What's this now?" Willie barked, noticing the full bin. "You're home all day, and you can't even manage the simplest tasks." He stormed over, fury radiating off him, and with a swift kick, sent the bin's contents sprawling across the floor.
"Clean it up," he commanded.
My hands trembled as I reached down, not from the pain of my injury, but from a deeper, more profound hurt. That night, sleep eluded me, his harsh words echoing in my head, mingling with the hot sting of tears. Morning brought no solace, only the harsh light illuminating the remnants of last night's chaos. Sitting at the kitchen table with divorce papers in front of me, I listened to the coffee dripping in the background. Willie stumbled in, reeking of beer from the night before. "Morning," he growled, his voice rough. "What's for breakfast?" Without a word, I pushed the papers toward him. He glanced down, a sly, mocking smile spreading across his face. "You serious?" he scoffed. "As a heart attack," I replied, my heart pounding yet my voice steady. He laughed loudly, dismissing me. "You ain't got the guts." "I already did it." "Just need your sign-off," I countered, meeting his intense gaze. He leaned in close, sneering. "You think you can survive without me? You're a broken bird, can't even take out the trash." "I'm done talking, Willie," I said firmly. "Sign the papers, or I'll have the authorities make you." He scoffed, grabbed the pen with a tight grip, and signed his name, each stroke heavy and deliberate. Tossing the pen down as if it burned him, he sneered, "Good luck, darling. You'll be crawling back before the month's up." But I couldn't. This was my line in the sand, the moment I refused to tolerate any more degradation or lies. Despite everything, I smiled, because those signed papers felt like the first step on crutches toward a different, better life. "Crawling's not my style," I murmured quietly. The next morning, I woke to an eerie silence, a stark contrast to the inner turmoil I felt, knowing everything was about to change. Over coffee, Willie mentioned casually that we needed to finalize the property split and already had a lawyer in mind. A reputed hotshot from the city near Virentix Tex. "You coming with me?" he stated more than asked, as if my agreement was given despite my current state. With my legs still healing and my choices seeming limited, I realized this was just the beginning of another long road. I nodded silently as Willie helped me into the car, carefully propping up my cast. Everything seemed normal as we headed down the highway, the city's skyline shrinking into the distance like a cluster of miniature buildings. Suddenly, he pulled over. "The wheel might need air," he mumbled, stepping out to check. Reluctantly, I got out too, leaning heavily on the car for support. He pretended to fuss around the tires for a moment. Then, without warning, he jumped back into the driver's seat, hit the gas, and sped off. I barely had time to react. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, I watched his car disappear down the highway, the sound of the engine fading into silence. Shocked and disbelieving, I pulled out my phone and hit record, calling him in desperation. His response was smug and cold. "Come back," I yelled. But he just laughed, a harsh, mocking sound, and hinted that this was what I deserved for seeking a divorce. Then the line went dead. The harsh reality hit me as I stood there, the taillights of his car becoming a blurred speck in the distance. Alone, miles from civilization, the winter chill began to seep into my bones, a cruel reminder of my sudden abandonment. Cars passed by, drivers oblivious to my plight, their indifference stinging as sharply as the cold. As time dragged on, a Jeep truck rattled to a stop beside me. Behind the wheel was Gary, my former boss, the last person I expected to see. The car's heater blasted warm air, reviving my chilled body. Gary's concern was evident as he glanced over at me. "You look like crap, Bella," he said gruffly yet kindly. Why the hell didn't you call someone? Shrugging, I felt the enormity of my predicament weighs down on me. Thought I could handle it, I muttered, my voice a mere whisper. He left you on the side of the road with a broken leg? Gary's voice rose, a mix of incredulity and anger. That Willie is a damn coward. I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself as I recalled the icy wind and the biting cold. Yeah, I guess he is, I agreed. We drove to Virentix Tech, and Gary helped me up to the 5th floor of the building. The familiar sounds of the workplace were both jarring and comforting, reminding me of the life I once knew. Inside his office, Gary handed me a steaming mug of coffee, which I clutched gratefully, letting the warmth seep into my hands. Thanks, Gary, I said after taking a tentative sip. The coffee was strong, just the way I liked it, a stark contrast to the bitter cold I had endured outside. Gary paced back and forth, his movements reflecting his agitation. Can't believe that bastard, he muttered under his breath, still struggling to comprehend Willie's callousness. After steering the conversation away from Willie, Gary and I settled into a comfortable silence, the only sound being the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall. We had a history of working together, a shared rhythm of understanding each other's moods that made the silence feel natural rather than strained. Eventually, Gary stopped his restless pacing and faced me directly, his demeanor shifting from agitation to a serious tone. What are you going to do now, Bella? He asked, the playful edge completely gone from his voice. I don't know, I admitted, the uncertainty of my situation weighing heavily on me. Gary's expression softened, knowing deep down I had already made up my mind. I'll think about it, I repeated, allowing a smile to spread across my face. Gary grunted in response, a sound that conveyed both understanding and a touch of impatience. Having a purpose, a place to be, and the support of someone who believed in me was more than I could have hoped for given the day's events. It was an unexpected turn, but perhaps it was exactly the kind of change I needed. Later, the tension was palpable as Willie approached the boss's office. The thud of his boots echoed more hesitantly today, as if he sensed the impending storm. He pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, heralding his arrival to what was once his domain. There I stood, leaning against the desk, arms folded, waiting. Willie, come in. Shut the door behind you, the boss commanded, his voice ironclad and unwavering. Willie saw me and his face turned pale, though he quickly composed himself. What's this about? He grumbled, his voice edgy, like a cornered animal ready to lash out. The boss gestured towards a chair, but Willie didn't sit. He crossed his arms, mimicking my posture but with defiance where mine held determination. Willie, the boss began, fixing him with a steely gaze that could pierce through armor. I always thought of you as a sharp man, but what you've done, that's the sharpest kind of foolishness. Willie shot a glance at me, a mix of fear and anger flashing in his eyes. So she's been yapping, has she? What lies has she been selling? No lies needed, mate, I said calmly, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. Just played him the greatest hits of your ugly symphony. You've been recorded, clear as day. The boss reached into his desk, pulled out a recording device, and slid it across the table. Care to listen for nostalgia? He offered. Willie's face turned the color of ash. You can't do this. You can't fire me over what, Willie? Over terrorizing your wife, my employee? Oh, I can and I am. The boss interjected, his voice cold as steel. Willie's eyes darted between us, searching desperately for any sign of weakness, any crack in our united front. There wasn't a hint of weakness in our stance. I'll take you to court, Willie spat, his voice dripping with desperation. That's funny, I responded with a cold laugh, because that's exactly where we're going. The only difference is I've got a mountain of evidence, and you've got nothing but lies and empty threats. The boss stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor like a battle cry. Get out of my office, and get out of our lives. You're finished here. With those final words, Willie's fate was decisively sealed. In the courtroom, the evidence against him was overwhelming, heavier than his furious denials. The judge wasted no time, hammering the gavel down like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I sentence you to pay compensation, and this court grants the separation, the judge declared. It felt like the first breath of spring, chilly, yet promising new beginnings. Back at my job, I slipped into the familiar routines of work, but everything felt rejuvenated. Each keystroke was a brick in the reconstruction of my life. Every friendly good morning was mortar, and each completed project added another pillar to the new foundation I was building for myself. Bella, my colleague Harold said, breaking into my thoughts. Must feel weird, huh? Getting everything back. I swiveled in my chair to face him. Weird doesn't begin to cover it, Harold. It feels like I've come back from the dead. Harold chuckled, his laughter warm and hearty. Zombie Bella, back for revenge, huh? I cracked a smile. Something like that. Only this time, I'm not taking any crap from anyone. No more misses, that's the spirit, Harold agreed, nodding. You know we've all got your back here, no matter what. I nodded, feeling the genuine warmth of the office. It wasn't just the heating, it was the camaraderie, a shared fortress against any storm that might come our way. This new chapter wasn't just a fresh start. It was a reclaimed life, and I was ready to live it fully.